Chapter 722. The situation on the field had obviously surprised everyone. Not everyone could see Ding Nan's depression and strangeness, but in the eyes of those who were observant, it was obvious that Ding Nan was right. You soon. Song Guohua and the other disciples of Mount Wuhua, who had been shouting slogans loudly, were also stunned. The words, "sect leader of Mount Wuhua is so powerful," came to an abrupt halt. Song Guohua stared blankly at Ding Nan, who had returned. He wanted to cheer for her, but judging from the situation in front of him, it didn't seem that Ding Nan had won the fight, did it? But why did his sect leader come back on his own without even fighting? Yes, he couldn't use the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade, but there must be other powerful magical weapons, right? Could it be that even if he used these powerful magical weapons, he still couldn't defeat this foreign devil? This foreign devil was not powerful, and he could also defeat him. Song Guohua asked tentatively, "Palm." As soon as he said a word, Ding Nan glared at him angrily and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up, don't ask anything." Song Guohua immediately shut his mouth obediently. He looked back at Alba, who was trying hard to hold back her laughter, and suddenly said in a low voice, "Hey, why do you foreigners have such long names? Your name is also so long." Alba couldn't help but burst out laughing, but as soon as she laughed, she saw Ding Nan glaring at her angrily. She was startled and quickly pulled a long face, looking as if she had suffered a great deal of hatred. She said seriously, "Master, my name is very short." As soon as she said this, some of the other members of the Yinyang sect reacted and secretly laughed. Ding Nan was furious. "Shut up, all of you." When Zheng Yuan had just died, Ding Nan had used cruel means to kill Zheng Yuan's hardcore followers of the Yinyang faction. After a bloody massacre, she had naturally established a lot of prestige. At this time, she had killed 2 people in a second, which had doubled her prestige. Her shout immediately scared the others into silence, for fear of provoking their sect leader. When the foreigner with the long name saw Ding Nan coming down from the field, he was still a little stunned. He looked around blankly, then pointed to himself in disbelief. I seem to have won." After saying that, he danced with joy. I won." He turned his head to Yin Kong and said happily, "Master, I won. I actually won. This seems to be called taking the opponent's illness without fighting?" The corner of Yin Kong's eyes couldn't help but twitch when he saw him scratching his ears and cheeks impatiently. He shouted in a low voice, "Idiot, this is the art of subduing the enemy without fighting. Come back quickly, don't embarrass yourself there." The foreigner replied with an "oh," and obediently returned to the crowd. However, as soon as he stood still, he was overjoyed and started to celebrate with his fellow disciples. Almost their Yin Kong seemed to be used to these foreigners' behavior. He glanced at Ding Nan coldly, snorted, and said in a cold voice, "Zhenren Ding, don't you want to stand up for me? Why did you enter the field?" Ding Nan smiled slightly but didn't speak. She just glanced at Song Guohua. Song Guohua reacted very quickly and immediately understood. He said loudly, "That's not right. What's the seniority of our leader? What's the seniority of your foreign disciple? Isn't it disgraceful for my master to compete with him?" His words were opportunistic, but they were reasonable. Ding Nan couldn't help but feel very satisfied when she heard this. But what made her even happier was that now that she was the leader, she no longer had to act according to others' eyes. Unlike before, she had to pay attention to Zhou Qin's or Zheng Yuan's expressions or eyes all the time. As long as there was the slightest mistake, she had to stand up and speak for them as a shield. Now, as long as she gave a wink, someone would stand up and speak for her obediently. She was so happy. Ding Nan was now like a drug addict who couldn't stop. It was absolutely impossible for her to give up the little power in her hands and her cultivation. She had already been involved in the big whirlpool of the cultivation world, and she was getting deeper and deeper. Of course, others didn't know what she was thinking, but Li Yundong, who was watching from afar, felt a little emotional. After laughing for a while, he looked at the woman who had once ridiculed him in the past and had once confided in him like a young girl in love. For a moment, he felt a lot of emotions. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, was still smiling heartlessly. She giggled and said, "Yundong, don't you think Ding Nan is a little stupid? If the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is useless, she still has other powerful magical weapons. Even if she doesn't, she can probably defeat this foreign devil with magic, right? This foreign devil seems to only be in the Zhuji phase." Li Yundong shook his head with a smile and patted the girl's head. "On the contrary, Ding Nan is not stupid. She is very smart. In my opinion, her position as the leader of the sect is a little strange, so deep in her heart, she is eager to be recognized by others. Otherwise, she would definitely not get involved in this mess. Moreover, she has already achieved her goal of killing people to establish her prestige. In the future, if anyone in the cultivation world wants to make trouble for her, they will have to think twice. It's just the right time to stop now." Su Chan was not a fool, so she understood immediately. Her eyes lit up. Yes. Even if she can kill this foreigner, it won't do her any more good. It's better to stop while she's ahead. However, now these cultivators of the Zhengyi school should have seen through her trump card. I'm afraid it will be difficult for her to sneak attack again. Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Although the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is powerful, as long as I'm not caught off guard, it's not impossible to guard against it. But if this powerful magical weapon is used together with the threaded hairpin of soul traversal, it's a little powerful. Moreover, if I'm not mistaken, Ding Nan should still have the immortal pen in her hand. Her current cultivation is not very high, but with these 3 magic treasures in hand, it's really a little scary. If used properly, even if I'm not injured, I will have to temporarily avoid it." Su Chan frowned and sighed softly. "I hope that Ding Nan will not go against us in the future. Otherwise, the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade will be too difficult to guard against." "But, Yundong, this Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is so powerful. How did the cultivator who held this powerful magical weapon be defeated?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "You asked the right person. When I was in the spirit space, I once read Cultivation Chronicles. It said that the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade had appeared in the world twice. The first time was during the reign of Emperor Huizong of the Song dynasty. A cultivator named Jinren Xiantian used this vicious powerful magical weapon. At that time, this cultivator relied on this powerful magical weapon to run amok on the land of Jiangxi. At that time, famous cultivators almost avoided him when they saw him, even Zhang Tianshi was no exception. But later, Zhengyi school came up with a solution. They chose the strongest but least famous disciple of the younger generation to go down the mountain to find trouble with Jinren Xiantian. At that time, when Jinren Xiantian was bullying men and women, he suddenly met this nameless Zhengyi disciple and started fighting. Li Yundong said with a strange smile, "It's a pity that Jinren Xiantian, who dominated the world, was still trying to find out the other party's name when he was about to be killed by this Zhengyi disciple." When Su Chan heard this, she couldn't help but laugh. This guy is so stupid. If he can't get the other party's name, he will use other methods to fight with him. However, Li Yundong shook his head and smiled. When you have a powerful magical weapon in your hand, you will become overly dependent on it. You always want to use your strongest point to defeat your opponent, but you ignore other things. Speaking of which, it's not a good thing to rely too much on powerful magical weapons. Ding Nan looks tyrannical and domineering now, but if her cultivation doesn't keep up, she will be no different from Ise Chuyun. If she meets a top master, she will definitely lose. Su Chan blinked and asked, "What about the second guy who held the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade? How was he defeated?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "The second one was in the Jiajing period of the Ming dynasty. A cultivator named He Yedong refined the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade again. At the beginning, Jinren he was much more cautious and low-key than Xiantian. He never fought with people he didn't know. It wasn't until the powerful magical weapon in his hand and he knew almost all the names of the masters in the cultivation world that he began to kill. He even thought of using the emperor to control the princes. This angered the Son of Heaven. Emperor Jiajing flew into a rage and mobilized 20,000 imperial guards and 300 cultivators to gang up on him. They crushed him to pieces. Su Chan opened her mouth slightly and said tongue-tied, "Ah? So miserable?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Of course. No matter how powerful the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is, it's still a powerful magical weapon for one-on-one combat." There were so many names on the field. Could you read them all? Even if you could, it would be like chanting a spell. The others would have killed you long ago. In fact, in that battle, Jinren He, who was almost invincible in one-on-one combat, only had time to kill 2 cultivators before he was blasted into powder by countless powerful magical weapons and magic formations. As he spoke, Li Yundong sighed with emotion. Speaking of which, this Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade is not a good thing. Its murderous aura is too strong, and it's an ominous thing. I'm afraid that Ding Nan holding it will be a disaster rather than a blessing. Su Chan blinked and looked at Li Yundong, her face full of admiration. "Yundong, you really know a lot. I've never heard Master talk about this before." Li Yundong rubbed the little girl's head dotingly and said with a smile, "As the emperor, he naturally has to prohibit these things from being spread among the people. Even if there are records in books, they have to be banned and destroyed. Since ancient times, heroes have used martial arts to violate the ban. Those who practice martial arts have already been very feared by the emperor, let alone these cultivators. Those cultivation sects are large and have many conflicts with each other, so they naturally don't dare to rebel at will. However, lone heroes like He Yetong and Shen Tian are very unscrupulous. If these things are spread around, I'm afraid that there will be villains with bad intentions everywhere who will join the church to learn the art of dragon slaying." Su Chan suddenly understood, but she quickly asked with a smile, "By the way, Yundong, if you used this powerful magical weapon just now, with your memory, can you remember such a long name that the foreigner recited?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Since ancient times, there has only been a saying that people have a photographic memory. How can there be such a thing as an unforgettable ear? Even if there is, it is only amazing lyrics and poems. It takes a full minute to recite a name that has no logical connection with each other. Not to mention me, even the Emperor of Heaven will have a headache after hearing his name. Su Chan giggled. "There are also times when you can't do it?" Li Yundong's face darkened. "Are you itching for a fart? How can you say that your man can't do it? When I recover, you will know whether I can do it or not." Su Chan giggled and said, "You are always King annoying. You might as well take a Russian name and call it Sabuksky. It's such a long name. How good is it? It can also prevent Ding Nan from using the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade to hook your soul." Li Yundong's face was serious as he said, "Then you might as well take a name too. Call it I Won't Feel Comfortable Without a Spanking. What do you think?" After that, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. Chapter 723. The two of them laughed for a while, but the situation outside the field changed again. Seeing that Ding Nan had tactfully retreated, Yin Kong didn't want to continue to entangle with her. Although he was not willing to let Ding Nan kill 2 of his fellow disciples in seconds, he had priorities. Although he hated this beautiful woman in his heart, what was more important at the moment was the important matter of the Zhuni school. They had prepared for a long time for today's mountaineering. Although they had only come to test the waters, when they heard the news that the Japanese cultivation world was coming to make trouble and that the Zhuni school had lost face, Yin Kong was even more overjoyed. He believed that today was the weakest time of the Zhuni school, so he made up his mind to take charge and force them to abdicate. Even if this matter failed, he could find out the details of the other party. If he succeeded, it would definitely be a great contribution. After the leader ascended in the future, would the position fall into the hands of others? Because of this, Ding Nan was only a trouble for Yin Kong, while the disciples of the Zhuni school, who claimed to be the authentic Xian men, were the real trouble. Although Ding Nan's magic treasures and trump cards had been seen through by him, it would take a lot of energy to deal with her in a short time. Moreover, who knew if she had other powerful magical weapons? In the cultivation world, even if it was a Jinshin master, if he did not know the opponent's magic treasure or details, he would suddenly be caught off guard by the opponent's magic treasure, and even his body and soul would be destroyed. Over the past thousands of years, there had been as many cases as the hairs on an ox. When Li Yundong had suddenly encountered the immortal tying rope, because he didn't know the characteristics of this powerful magical weapon, he had reached out his hand rashly. As a result, he had been tightly tied up. At that time, Li Yundong was a young boy and didn't know this, but Yin Kong was a great cultivator who had cultivated for decades. Naturally, it was impossible for him not to know this. There was a saying in the martial arts world, the older a person is, the less courageous he is. This saying was also applicable in the world of cultivation. However, in the world of martial arts and cultivation, this kind of courage did not mean that they were timid. Instead, it meant that they would be more cautious and more cautious. Years of living and experience had long smoothed out their sharpness, making them even more cautious, in case they failed miserably in an easy task. What really made Yin Kong wary were the two fierce men of the Zhengyi school, sect master Zhang Tianshi and the former head of the Linggong sect, Wang Yuanshan. Although it was rumored that Wang Yuanshan had ascended 10 years ago, only celestial master Zhang was left. However, a lightning tribulation master was a lightning tribulation master after all. He could transcend the lightning tribulation at any time and become an immortal. It was currently winter, and if spring came, celestial master Zhang would have transcended the 9 lightning tribulations and become immortal. At that time, it would be extremely difficult to deal with him. Almost there it was precisely because of this thought that Yin Kong decisively stopped looking for trouble with Ding Nan. He just said a few words to save face. Humph, Zhenren Ding, you really have a good trick. We, the Shantian sect of Zhengyi school, will remember this. After that, he turned his head and pointed his spear at the Zhengyi school again. Yin Kong sneered and said, Zhenren Zhang, look. How weak are you now? Don't you feel ashamed that you even need outsiders to help you with your internal affairs? Zhang Ling was domineering and arrogant, so she naturally refused to admit defeat. She sneered and said, anyone with a discerning eye can tell who is right and who is wrong at a glance. This fellow cultivator can't stand your behavior of forgetting your ancestors, so he helped you out of righteousness. You can control the mouths of your disciples, but can you control the mouths of all the cultivators in the world? Yin Kong raised his head and laughed. You're really eloquent. Good. It's a pity that we cultivators practice Dharma, Qi, flesh, and Taoist magic arts, not our mouths. No matter how eloquent you are, it's useless if you can't beat us in the end. Zhang Ling raised her eyebrows and sneered. Oh. You've finally revealed your fox's tail? You want to fight? Well, how can we fight? We'll keep you company. Yin Kong sneered, pointed to his disciples, and shouted, disciples of the Shantian sect, listen up. Although he had brought a lot of foreigners with him this time, only a few of them had received the true teachings. Most of them were sent to make up the numbers. The main force was still the black-headed, yellow-skinned Chinese cultivators. As soon as Yin Kong shouted, dozens of Chinese disciples jumped out, holding long swords in their hands, and quickly set up a large formation. Yin Kong pointed to the field and said proudly, if any one of you can break this Shantian formation, we'll leave immediately. What do you think? Zhang Ling glanced around and saw that the dozens of Chinese disciples had set up a strange sword formation. In particular, there were 2 golden-eyed foreigners at the center of the formation. She sneered in her heart and was about to step forward when Zhang Kongyun grabbed her arm and whispered, Shiji, this formation is a little strange. Don't be careless. Since the other party dared to come, they must be fearless. Let me do it. Zhang Ling immediately shook her head and said, no, Shiji, you've just been injured. You can't fight with others now, or there will be endless trouble in the future. However, Zhang Kongyun said anxiously, Shiji, if I don't do it, who else can? Zhang Ling was silent for a while. She looked around and saw that although there were many disciples of the Zhuni school, there were 500 or 600 of them. However, many of these people were masters at the top phase of Yang spirit, which was similar to her own cultivation. They were only one step away from the Jinshin. As cultivators who had cultivated for decades, as long as they had a little more time, they might have more Jinshin. You soon. Once a cultivator reached the Jinshin phase, they would realize a qualitative change and completely enter a new world. This was the case for the Zhuni school at the moment. There was an obvious bottleneck and vacuum in the sect's strength. After Wang Yuanshan, who was known as the #1 in the world, betrayed the sect, the strength of the Zhuni school suffered an unprecedented blow. Later, Zhang Tianshi had to go into seclusion. On the one hand, he had to work hard to improve his strength, and on the other hand, he had to prevent others from challenging him and revealing his true strength. A top master was not terrible. What was terrible was that others did not know how strong he was. Zhang Tianshi was obviously well versed in this psychological tactic. He had been in seclusion for 10 years, so no one knew what kind of realm he had reached. Thus, they did not dare to easily make a move against the behemoth of the Zhuni school. At this time, in terms of the number of masters at the top phase of Yang spirit in the Zhuni school, there were probably 300 or 400 cultivators present. They were definitely the best in the world. In time, 1 in 10 of these masters would transform into Jinshin masters, and the Zhuni school would immediately become an extremely terrifying cultivation sect. But now, among these masters at the Yang spirit phase, the one who could fight the best was herself. The Jinshin phase was even more lacking, and only Zhang Kongyun was left. Zhang Ling couldn't help but sigh. Time waits for no man. These traitors didn't come earlier or later, but chose to come at this time. Their sinister intentions are truly infuriating. On the side of the Zhuni school, there was a sense of pain and entanglement. However, Su Chan, who was in the distance, said to Li Yundong in a low voice, Yundong, they're going to fight. Do you think we should help them? Li Yundong snapped his fingers and flicked her on the forehead. Help? How? Do you want to help with your life? Which side do you want to help? This is their internal affairs. Why should we get involved? Watch the show, watch the show. Su Chan covered her forehead and pouted. I was just saying. Why do you have to get physical? Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He held the little girl in his arms and began to get physical. The two of them flirted with each other while watching the show. Especially at this time, the two sides were at each other's throats. The situation was so tense that it was suffocating. It was like watching a movie in the cinema. If there was a bucket of popcorn at this time, it would be perfect. After playing with Li Yundong for a while, Su Chan obediently nestled in his arms and carefully looked at the sword formation. She found that although the formation of the Big Dipper and the 7 stars of the Southern Dipper could be vaguely seen, there were 3 more places where the sword chi was soaring into the sky. The killing intent was extremely strong. Even from a distance, she could feel a sharp chi coming at her, causing her skin to sting slightly. She said curiously, Yundong, this sword formation is so strange. It seems to be very scary. Li Yunyang was shocked by the sword chi of the sword formation, and all his hair stood on end. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at it. Then, he pointed at the 3 formation eyes with the heaviest sword chi in the sword formation and said, this sword formation is in the form of Ziwei Do, and the 3 formation eyes are filled with murderous intent. If I'm not wrong, this should be the 7 killing star, the destruction star, and the greedy wolf star of the 3 killing stars. Once these 3 formation eyes are activated by the magic formation, they will immediately form a terrifying killing wolf destruction formation that will not stop until one of them dies. Su Chan naturally knew that the words, killing wolf destruction formation, represented an irreversible destructive force between heaven and earth. Her face suddenly changed in horror. So powerful? Who can break this formation? Yundong, can you break it? Li Yundong's face gradually became serious, and he couldn't help thinking, if it were me, how could I break this Shantian formation? In this formation, if any cultivator fought with me one-on-one, they would just be sending themselves to death. I'm afraid that no one can fight with me for more than 3 rounds. However, the great mysterious heaven formation that these dozens of people had formed was not just a combination of the strength of dozens of people, but a terrifying geometric increase. The power of this formation was based on the cultivators in the formation eyes. Even if everyone in the formation eyes was a Yang spirit master, 3 of them together was a basic addition, which was 3. However, with each addition, the power would be multiplied by 2 on the basis of these 2 people, which was 6. Then, another person would be multiplied by 2 again, which was 12. In this way, when the strength of dozens of people was repeatedly superimposed, it was simply unimaginable how powerful it was. Li Yundong observed it carefully for a while and felt that this formation was almost perfect and flawless. No matter where he attacked, it would attract a fierce and terrifying counterattack from the other side. Dozens of times the strength would come roaring like a landslide. It was really not something that a single person could resist. The more Li Yundong looked at it, the more frightened he became. Inadvertently, he felt cold sweat running down his back. He thought to himself, no wonder it said that there are powerful magical weapons above magic, and there are magic formations above powerful magical weapons. After a series of fierce battles, Li Yundong had broken the Thunder Retribution with the power of Jinshin and defeated the Japanese cultivation world by himself. Even if he was not very proud, he still had some thoughts of looking down on the world. But now that Li Yundong suddenly saw this terrifying Shantian formation, his pride immediately disappeared, and he didn't dare to look down on the heroes of the world anymore. He was shocked and thought to himself, how could this overseas force of the Zhuni school, which suddenly appeared out of nowhere, use such a powerful magic formation? How powerful is the Sanju formation of the Zhuni school, which is known as the end of heaven, end of earth, and end of man? He was secretly frightened as he watched from above. Zhang Kongyun, who was below the field, was naturally a person who knew what was good for him. The more he watched, the more serious his expression became. After watching for more than a minute, his forehead was covered with beads of sweat, and his lips were trembling slightly. Looking at Zhang Kongyun's appearance, Yin Kong couldn't help laughing wildly. What do you think? If you don't have the guts, just give up. Zhang Kongyun calmed down and gave Zhang Ling, who was beside him, a reassuring look. Then he took a deep breath and shouted, Wang Yuanshan, if you stand by and do nothing, Mount Longhu will be completely replaced. Do you really want to see this happen? His loud shout caused the expressions of many people from both the Zhuni school and the Shantian sect to suddenly change. Only a few people in the world knew that Wang Yuanshan was not dead. Most people only knew that Wang Yuanshan had betrayed the sect and then been captured by the Zhuni school. Not long after, he had ascended to heaven. But now, they suddenly heard that Wang Yuanshan, who had been known as the best in the world 10 years ago, was still alive. This was like a shocking thunder in their ears. Wang Yuanshan is not dead? Yin Kong's face changed, and he looked at Zhang Kongyun in surprise. But after looking around for a while and seeing no one appear, he couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He sneered and said, You're not so scared that you've started to talk nonsense, are you? Zhang Kongyun didn't even look at him. He just said loudly, Wang Yuanshan, no matter what happened in the past, you used to be a member of our Zhuni school. You don't want to see our sect, which has been passed down for thousands of years, disappear, do you? Zhang Kongyun's voice was so loud that it spread far away. It shook the valley and echoed. For a moment, everyone was silent. They all looked around, searching for the figure of the former best in the world. But after searching for a while, they only saw green mountains and blue waters, and the shadows of trees. Where could they find anyone else? Yin Kong waited for a while in fear, but he still didn't see Wang Yuanshan. He couldn't help laughing and said, It seems that you are really crazy. Do you still want to call back the soul of a man who has been dead for 10 years? As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a very magnetic middle-aged man sigh softly not far away from him and say, "We were born of the same root. Why are you in such a hurry to kill each other?" As soon as the voice sounded, everyone's eyes turned to the source. They saw a man of average stature standing there. He was handsome and had a wisp of beard on his chin, which made him look very elegant. He had his hands behind his back, and his clothes were fluttering in the wind, as if a gust of wind would blow him away. There was an indescribable elegance all over his body. For a moment, a thought suddenly flashed through almost everyone's mind. Is this the best in the world, Wang Yuanshan? Chapter 724. Although there was no first in martial arts and no second in martial arts, in the 5,000 years of history of the Chinese people, there were very few who dared to claim to be the best in the world and be recorded in the history books and recognized by the world. Soon even a great man like immortal Zhang Sanfeng, who had lived from the end of the southern Song dynasty to the beginning of the Ming dynasty, had reached the peak of cultivation and could be called a living immortal, had never been called the best in the world. Although he could be called a grandmaster, even a person like Zhang Sanfeng did not dare to be presumptuous when he came to Mount Longhu. In the same way, Celestial Master Zhang of Mount Longhu had also been defeated in fights. In the early Qing dynasty, Celestial Master Zhang traveled to the Shangyun Temple in Lianyungang on the surface of Jiangsu province. On a whim, he fought with the Taoist priest and was defeated. From this, it could be seen that there were many hidden talents in China. Even powerful people like Zhang Sanfeng and Celestial Master Zhang did not dare to claim to be the best in the world. But since the ancient times, there had always been one or two extraordinary geniuses who could captivate the hearts of all living beings with their earth-shattering talent. Since the founding of Xian, the closest master to be recognized as the world's best fighter was the famous, the world's best fighter, Sun Lutang. Sun Lutang entered the path of cultivation through martial arts and eventually reached the peak of cultivation. His cultivation was admired and respected by the cultivation world. However, Sun Lutang became an immortal in 1929, and for nearly 80 years, he was not recognized as the best in the world until Celestial Master Zhang of Jingyi School publicly admitted that Wang Yuanshan's cultivation was higher than his and that he was stronger than him in fights. Therefore, Wang Yuanshan was recognized as the best in the world by the world. When Celestial Master Zhang promoted Wang Yuanshan, he wanted him to become famous. However, since ancient times, there was no first in martial arts and no second in martial arts. If he dared to claim to be the best in the world, there would definitely be many people who would come to challenge him. Wang Yuanshan did live up to expectations at the beginning and defeated the masters of various sections. However, when he was famous all over the world, he met his nemesis, Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang had also heard of Wang Yuanshan's reputation as the best in the world. She was not convinced and wanted to test him, but she was completely defeated and even lost her body and mind. As soon as the two of them met, Wang Yuanshan, the genius most favored by Zhang Tianshi of the Jingyi School, immediately rebelled and threw himself into the arms of the beauty. Then, Zhang Tianshi flew into a rage and mobilized all the forces of the Jingyi School to capture Wang Yuanshan. It was also because of this battle that Wang Yuanshan single-handedly fought against many masters of the Jingyi School, which made him famous. In the past 10 years, the world had thought that he was dead. Who could defeat a dead person? In the past 10 years, although many outstanding cultivators had emerged from various sects, there was no one like Wang Yuanshan, who was similar to a magical power. Almost there because of this, not only did Wang Yuanshan's reputation as the world's #1 expert not weaken, but it became even more valuable in the eyes of the public. Li Yundong, who was at the top of the mountain, saw that as soon as Wang Yuanshan appeared, everyone was stunned. There was no one on the field who dared to take a deep breath. He couldn't help but feel shocked and emotional. Wang Yuanshan is really not dead. Su Chan's mouth was wide open, almost able to fit her small fist. Master called him just now. Why didn't he come out? Li Yundong was also very shocked. He felt as if he had seen a legendary figure. He sighed and said, he must have his reasons, right? Su Chan's heart skipped a beat and she immediately said, "No, I have to tell Master right away." Li Yundong quickly held her down and glared at her. "Are you crazy? If you go out at this time, won't you expose yourself?" Su Chan responded with an "oh" and sat down again with a resentful face. She looked at the field intently. She saw Wang Yuanshan standing in the eyes of the crowd. He really had a kind of unrestrained and otherworldly aura, which made people admire him at first glance. She couldn't help but sigh and say, the world's #1 expert really deserves his reputation. As she spoke, she suddenly had an idea. She turned to Li Yundong and asked, "Yundong, why do people still say that Wang Yuanshan is the best in the world in the past 10 years? Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's very simple. It's because there has never been a master who can suppress everyone. After all, it's not enough to praise a dead person. If you're not convinced, well, let's first go to the 9th heaven and find Wang Yuanshan to fight. The most terrible thing is not a master who can beat you down at once, because you know his details. One day, you will surpass his realm. But this kind of person who doesn't show his face is different. You never know how strong he is. You are always speculating about his details. After a long time, your Taoist heart will be seriously affected by him. When the time comes, your subconscious will tell you that you can't beat him, because he is the world's #1 expert, and you have always been living in his shadow." Su Chan blinked her eyes and asked again, "If you fight with Wang Yuanshan, who is stronger?" Li Yundong thought for a while and said slowly, "I don't know, but I guess it should be the current Wang Yuanshan. However, since he has appeared, his status as the world's #1 expert is no longer mysterious and terrifying. Sooner or later, someone will test his realm and bottom line. Moreover, as long as he is alive, he may be defeated. On the contrary, if he dies, it will really solidify his title as the world's #1 expert. No one can defeat a dead person." Su Chan suddenly smiled and said, "I finally know why the leaders of the major sects love to cultivate in seclusion so much. It turns out to be this reason." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't talk about it. Let's watch the show and see how powerful the world's #1 expert is." While the two of them were talking, the disciples of the Zhengyi school couldn't help exclaiming for a moment. There was surprise and joy in their voices. No matter what, at such a critical moment, a legendary figure like Wang Yuanshan had suddenly appeared. He was really like a savior, which was shocking. On the contrary, the older generation of cultivators of the Shantian sect were secretly a little panicked, but the eyes of the younger generation lit up and they were eager to have a try, especially the two golden-eyed foreign disciples in the eye of the formation. They couldn't wait to immediately compete with Wang Yuanshan so that they could replace him. Even Ding Nan, who had just entered the cultivation world, had heard of Wang Yuanshan's name. She stared at Wang Yuanshan and pinched the Hell Wuzhang enchanting jade with one hand. Her fingertips were a little white, and her palms were constantly sweating. She kept thinking about a question in her heart: what will happen if I call out Wang Yuanshan's name at this time? Will he die? As soon as this thought came to her mind, Ding Nan subconsciously denied it. Impossible, he is the world's #1 expert. He can't die like this. If he doesn't succeed, I will be miserable. I will definitely be killed by him. Ding Nan didn't realize that she had already lost before she even fought with Wang Yuanshan. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. There was nothing more obvious than this. There were many people who had the same idea as her, and Yin Kong was one of them. Ever since Wang Yuanshan appeared, he immediately stared at every part of Wang Yuanshan's body. His sharp eyes were like a radar, wanting to see through Wang Yuanshan from inside out. Even when Wang Yuanshan raised his hand and moved his foot, Yin Kong firmly remembered them and frantically searched for flaws. If Wang Yuanshan revealed even the slightest flaw, Yin Kong would immediately attack. If he could defeat Wang Yuanshan, then the title of the world's #1 expert would fall on his head. What a great honor it would be. But no matter how hard he looked, Wang Yuanshan didn't have any genuine qi attached to his body, and he couldn't see the power of Jinshan at all. It seemed that there were flaws everywhere. No matter where Wang Yuanshan was hit, Wang Yuanshan seemed to be dead without a doubt. But the more it was like this, the more Yin Kong didn't dare to make a move. He knew that the man standing in front of him was already known as the world's #1 expert 10 years ago. There was no reason for him to stay where he was after 10 years of closed-door training. As soon as Wang Yuanshan appeared, everyone wanted to challenge him, but no one could really make a move. When Li Yunyang saw this scene, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered what the middle-aged man had said to him when he was in a coma. His eyes flashed, as if he had understood something. He thought to himself, is this the highest realm of invincibility? Subduing the enemy without fighting? In comparison, my previous earth-shattering life-or-death battle is inferior. But how can I cultivate to such a realm? Moreover, if Wang Yuanshan really fights, what will the scene be like? I'm really looking forward to it. While he was thinking, Yin Kong finally gave up the idea of making trouble for Wang Yuanshan. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if Wang Yuanshan, who was standing in front of him, was a dazzling sun. He had to narrow his eyes to have the courage to look directly at him and talk to him. Wang Yuanshan? You didn't die? Well, you came at the right time. Our Xiantian formation needs a world's #1 expert like you to show its power. As he said this, he pointed to the murderous sword formation on the field and sneered, Wang Yuanshan, do you dare to break into this sword formation? If you dare, I will admit that you are the world's #1 expert. If you don't dare, then give me this #1 expert as soon as possible. When the people of the Zhengyi school heard this, they were all furious. Just as they were about to scold him, they were stopped by Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyun, and the others. They all stared at Wang Yuanshan attentively, wanting to see how he would deal with it. However, Wang Yuanshan showed a trace of an embarrassed smile on his face. He looked at the sword formation and sighed softly. You have dozens of people against me? I'm old. It's not appropriate, is it? Hearing this, Yin Kong was stunned, and an embarrassed expression almost appeared on his face. He had never expected that Wang Yuanshan, who was known as the world's #1 expert, would be so cowardly and reasonable that he could say such a thing. Su Chan, who was looking forward to Wang Yuanshan's great power on the top of the mountain, was stunned for a moment. Then, she burst out laughing. She giggled in Li Yundong's arms and said, Yundong, this Wang Yuanshan is very interesting. Li Yundong flicked his finger on her forehead and said, you have no respect for your elders. He is your grandmaster, okay? Su Chan covered her forehead with her hand and made a face at Li Yundong. What grandmaster? You're so annoying. You left my master alone for 10 years. Humph, I don't like such a grandmaster. Before Li Yundong could speak to her, he saw Yin Kong say unwillingly, Wang Yuanshan, do you want to fight them one-on-one? They are all disciples of the younger generation. Don't you feel embarrassed? Wang Yuanshan sighed again and said, I do feel a little embarrassed. As the saying goes, respect the old and love the young. You have to respect me, an old guy, and I also have to love these little guys. However, we are both old guys. Why don't we have a fight? Yin Kong was slightly annoyed and said, Wang Yuanshan, don't talk nonsense. When cultivators cultivate to the highest realm, they fight as a group. Individual courage is not enough. Wang Yuanshan nodded gently and said, what you said makes sense. Yin Kong was overjoyed and hurriedly said, then come and try our formation. As long as you dare to break in, even if you can hold on for a minute, we will consider it your win. However, Wang Yuanshan shook his head and said, no, I won't break in. Yin Kong narrowed his eyes and said, Wang Yuanshan, is it possible that you don't have an undeserved reputation and don't dare to break in? This sentence was very powerful. Cultivators valued their reputation the most. Many famous cultivators did not easily fight with others because they were afraid that once they made a mistake, they would ruin the reputation they had accumulated over the years. For a moment, everyone held their breath, waiting to see how Wang Yuanshan would deal with it. Even Li Yunyang thought to himself, if it were me, I would probably draw my sword out of its sheath, wouldn't I? However, Wang Yuanshan, who was in everyone's eyes, nodded honestly and said, well, I wouldn't dare. Yin Kong took a deep breath. He felt like his fist had hit cotton. All the words he had prepared were useless at this time. At this time, he really wanted to raise his head and laugh, but the corners of his eyes were twitching so badly that he really couldn't laugh. Everyone was also shocked. Is this Wang Yuanshan so cowardly? No way. Yin Kong laughed dryly. He pointed at Wang Yuanshan and said angrily, I think you are not the best fighter in the world, but the best receiver in the world. Anyone who was a little fashionable could understand that this sentence was extremely insulting. As long as one still had balls in his crotch, he would immediately fly into a rage after hearing it. However, Wang Yuanshan just smiled and cupped his hands, saying, I don't deserve it, I don't deserve it. Jianghu people appreciate me. It was as if Yin Kong was praising him. For a moment, everyone gasped and thought to themselves, oh my god, this Wang Yuanshan is really a coward. Seeing that he was not angry at all, could it be that Wang Yuanshan's nickname was the world's best taker back then, but later on, someone misrepresented it as the world's best taker, and in the end, it became the world's best taker? Sorry, it's late. There will be another chapter in a while. Chapter 725. Everyone saw that Wang Yuanshan, who was said to have passed away, had reappeared and was actually so terrified in front of everyone. Zhang Lufang, who had always admired Wang Yuanshan's name, couldn't help but shout at Wang Yuanshan anxiously, Sect Leader Wang, he's cursing you. Wang Yuanshan looked at the person who spoke in surprise. Is he scolding me? Aren't you praising me for being the best in the world? Zhang Lufang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He said you're the world's best receiver, not the world's best fighter. It's the bottom, not the hand. Wang Yuanshan had a look of realization. Oh, so that's how it is. I thought he was speaking a dialect of some place, so the pronunciation was a little different. Hee, I've learned something new. Little Marshal nephew, thank you. As expected, one is never too old to learn. Sigh, after not coming out for 10 years, I really can't keep up with the times. Speaking of which, what did the world's most beloved mean? Are they synonyms? Fake characters? When everyone saw what he did, they couldn't help but snicker secretly. Zhang Lufang stared at Wang Yuanshan, dumbfounded. She seemed to have heard a high and mighty, sacred thing in the depths of her heart being smashed to pieces. Wang Yuanshan and Zhang Kongyun had a very close personal relationship. Although Zhang Kongyun had personally led him into the trap, deep in Zhang Kongyun's heart, he admired and worshipped his best friend. In private, he often told Zhang Lufang how great Wang Yuanshan was in the past. But at this time, Zhang Liufang's eyes were wide open, and she muttered to herself, no way, this is the world's number one Wang Yuanshan? Master, are you sure this is Wang Yuanshan? Why do I feel like he's talking like a mother-in-law? Zhang Kongyun did not know whether to laugh or cry. He tugged at his beard fiercely, and his old face scrunched up. He cursed in a very low voice, this bastard. Is he deliberately playing tricks on us? Su Chan, who was on the cliff, also giggled and said, so this is how the world's number one expert comes to be. Was it a local dialect? So these past 10 years were all just rumors? Li Yundong rolled his eyes. Idiot. Was there such a thing as receiving 10 years ago? He's pretending to be confused. Can't you see that? Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong. Why can't I tell? He can make jokes, but I can't. Besides, aren't you the kind of guy who likes to mess with people the most? You look a lot like him to me. No wonder my master told me privately that you are very similar to Wang Yuanshan. He could see his shadow in you. Li Yundong raised his head and laughed. He said arrogantly, bullshit, he is him, and I am me. In the future, it's hard to say who looks like who. Seeing that he was a little jealous and unhappy, she smiled and said, yes, yes, my master is the only one in the world. Even Wang Yuanshan has to stand aside. He's just a little stronger than you now. In the future, you'll definitely be a little stronger than him, okay? Li Yundong deliberately said with a straight face, humph, although my current cultivation is not as good as his, I'm much more handsome than him. Su Chan laughed and trembled. Yes, yes, my master is the most handsome, so handsome. Li Yundong snorted and pinched the little girl's chubby cheeks lovingly. His eyes looked at the field again, only to see that Jinren Yinkong of the Shantian sect was really shocked by Wang Yuanshan's cowardice. He stood where he was and looked at Wang Yuanshan dumbfoundedly, not knowing what to say for a moment. The disciples of his sect all lowered their heads and tried to hold back their laughter. How could they still be in the mood to set up the sword formation? The murderous Shantian formation had been completely destroyed. Yusun Wang Yuanshan wanted to pretend to be stupid, but he couldn't force him to make a move, could he? Yinkong knew that the magic formation of the Shantian sect was extremely powerful. Even if a golden immortal entered the magic formation, he would have to go in standing and come out lying down. No matter how powerful Wang Yuanshan was, once he entered the magic formation, he would be blasted into pieces. However, this magic formation also had the biggest drawback, that was, it couldn't be moved and could only be static defense. Wang Yuanshan obviously saw through this at a glance. He refused to enter the formation no matter what, thinking that Yinkong wouldn't dare to do anything to him outside the formation. Even if a street gangster or a gangster saw this kind of rogue kung fu, they would have to sigh and retreat. Yinkong's face turned purple. Obviously, he was a little confused by Wang Yuanshan's shocking cowardice. He stammered, Wang Yuanshan, you are really... Wang Yuanshan looked at Yinkong with a smile and said, really what? Yinkong's face turned red, and he roared, you are really shameless. You are the shame of our generation of cultivators. Wang Yuanshan looked surprised and said, it's strange. Dozens of you want to beat me up. Is it strange that I refuse? You have so many young people bullying an old man like me. Don't you think it's shameless? Why do you blame me for being shameless? What kind of logic is this? Everyone couldn't help but laugh. Although they felt that Wang Yuanshan's words were reasonable, the disciples of Xian Tian's sect could clearly see that although Wang Yuanshan's voice was that of a middle-aged man, his face was that of a man in his 30s. It was the perfect age to combine maturity and handsomeness. At first glance, the bystanders only felt that he was 100 times more handsome than a movie star. If he were to be described as an old man, they would never be able to compare him to them. Yinkong was completely speechless by Wang Yuanshan. He had calculated everything, but he really hadn't expected that Wang Yuanshan would act like a hooligan and act shamelessly against him. For a moment, Yinkong was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He stood there, not knowing how to get out of the situation. Some of the disciples of the Jingyi school were laughing so hard that their intestines were about to break, but because of Wang Yuanshan's seniority, they didn't dare to laugh out loud. They just lowered their heads and their shoulders kept shaking. When the disciples of the Shantian sect saw their master lose his composure, they also wanted to laugh secretly, but they didn't dare to laugh in front of Yinkong. They could only lower their heads and keep shaking their shoulders like the disciples of the Jingyi school. Li Yundong and Su Chan looked over and saw that both sides of the field were bowing their heads, as if there was a memorial service. All they needed was a bow, a second bow, and a third bow. The disciples of the Jingyi school didn't dare to laugh, but Su Chan didn't have this scruple. The little girl had already rolled around in Li Yundong's arms with laughter. She rubbed her stomach and said with a smile, oh, this world's top expert is too funny. I've never seen such a funny master. Is he also a great cultivator? How does he look like a great cultivator? Li Yundong looked at Wang Yuanshan with flickering eyes. After a while, he suddenly exclaimed in a low voice, ah, I understand. I finally understand what the highest realm of cultivation is. Su Chan suddenly stopped laughing and looked at Li Yundong curiously. What is the highest realm of cultivation? Is it the oneness of heaven and man? Li Yundong's eyes lit up with surprise and he said, the oneness of heaven and man is just a process and a means. But after the oneness of heaven and man, there is the infinite void realm, and the infinite void realm secretly shows the meaning of being born into the world. Chaner, do you know that there are 3 realms of cultivators? Su Chan raised her head obediently and looked at Li Yundong's excited expression as he comprehended the truth of cultivation. She couldn't help but feel a little happy for him. She said very teasingly, I don't know. Yundong, please teach me. Li Yundong smiled and said, there are 3 realms of cultivators. The first is to see mountains as mountains and water as water, the second is to see mountains as mountains and water, the third is to see mountains as mountains and water as water. Su Chan's eyes also lit up. I understand. The first realm you mentioned is the realm of entering the secular world, the second is the realm of being born into the secular world, and the third is the realm of re-entering the secular world? Li Yundong laughed and rubbed the girl's long black hair hard. Not bad, not bad. You're really my girl. You're so smart. Come over and kiss me. Su Chan giggled as she leaned over and planted a few kisses on Li Yundong's cheek. It's because my master speaks in a way that's easy to understand. Unlike those Taoist classics, which are full of obscure poems that give me a headache just looking at them. Li Yundong said, Wang Yuanshan is in the 3rd realm. He sees mountains as mountains and water as water. This is also the realm of Taoism. Taoism follows nature, and all methods follow one's heart. The Buddhist Dharma says that there is no self, no human, no living beings, and no longevity. It means that everything is empty, and only the true Dharma follows one's heart. When cultivators cultivate to the highest realm, they will see through everything and see through everything. The only thing they have to follow is their own heart. As long as their heart moves, heaven and earth will move. Su Chan blinked her eyes. She seemed to understand, but at the same time, she didn't quite understand. She said, it sounds a little difficult to understand. Li Yundong laughed. In fact, it's very simple. The highest realm of cultivation is to follow one's own heart. One's own heart is the true Dharma, and it is the only thing in the world that can be relied on and trusted. As he spoke, Li Yundong's face suddenly became serious and he said seriously, in fact, the highest realm of cultivation can be simplified into one word. Su Chan, today I will tell you the secret of the highest realm of cultivation. You must not tell it to anyone. Su Chan rarely saw Li Yundong like this. She quickly got up from her master's arms and sat opposite him seriously. She said with a serious face, yes, I will not tell anyone. Li Yundong nodded and said solemnly, the highest realm of cultivation is to follow one's own heart. In short, there are 2 key words, follow one's heart. Therefore, when these 2 words are combined, they can represent the highest realm of cultivation. Before Su Chan could react, she said seriously, one's obedience, one's heart, put together. Suddenly, her mouth opened wide, and she was dumbfounded, and dumbfounded. One's obedience, one's heart, put together, isn't that the word, coward? The highest realm of cultivation is, coward. Coward? Yundong, you didn't make a mistake, did you? Su Chan stammered and didn't know what to say. But when she saw that although Li Yundong's face was serious, his stomach was slightly twitching, she suddenly understood. She threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and scolded him with a smile, you're playing with me. You're so annoying. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He put his arms around the little girl's waist and said, I'm not lying to you. This is indeed the highest realm of cultivation. Look at the leader of the Zhengyi school. He hasn't shown up from the beginning to the end. There is a deep water and fire outside, but he just sits on the fishing platform. If this isn't cowardice, then what is? Look at those cultivators who are being ordered around by the officials. Each of them can easily kill these officials, but they just admit defeat. What can you do to them? As the saying goes, if one man admits defeat, 10,000 people will be invincible. What a heroic statement. Su Chan said with a smile, "Bah, you talk a lot of nonsense. But, it seems that what you said makes a little sense." Li Yundong said with a smile, "It's more than a little sense. It's 2, 3, 4, or 5 points. Don't underestimate the matter of admitting defeat. It's a skill. Look at Wang Yuanshan's cowardice. No one can do anything to him. Don't you think he's the best in the world? Well, do you want to fight him one-on-one? But no one dares to do it. If you ask him to break through the magic formation by force, he will immediately admit defeat and insist that you want to beat him with numbers and bully the elderly. What can you do to him? Moreover, this wasn't a formal occasion, so even if he admitted defeat, he wouldn't get any benefits. This Wang Yuanshan is very shrewd. He's amazing, really amazing." Su Chan pursed her lips and said disapprovingly, "I hope he can defeat the other party in a fight. That would be interesting." Li Yundong shook his head with a smile. He looked at Wang Yuanshan with admiration and said, "No, Wang Yuanshan told me one thing with his own actions." Su Chan asked curiously, "What is it?" Li Yundong said, "This is that people should act according to their own strength." What is the Tao of nature? The Tao of nature is to act according to one's own strength. If one overestimates one's own strength, then one will be doomed to die. You only have the capacity to eat 2 bowls of rice, but you want to eat 20 bowls. If you don't die, who will? You obviously only have the strength of 100 kilograms, but you want to carry a burden of 500 kilograms. If you don't die, who will? Even if you cultivate to the golden immortal realm, you will still be invincible in the world. In the face of a powerful magic formation, even the most powerful golden immortal will shrink back. Su Chan blinked her eyes in understanding and looked at Wang Yuanshan. "I see, but can this make the people of the Xiantian sect retreat? This is unlikely, isn't it?" As soon as she finished speaking, she saw Wang Yuanshan sigh softly and walk up to Yin Kong. He patted him on the shoulder like an old friend and said, "Jinren, we are all disciples of the Zhini school. Why do you have to do this? Everything in this world can be discussed. Why don't you invite your leader to Mount Longhu some other day? We can all sit down and have a good talk. What do you think?" When Yin Kong saw Wang Yuanshan's hand coming for his shoulder, he wanted to dodge, but he felt that no matter how he dodged, Wang Yuanshan's palm would always land on his shoulder. It was as if an invisible hand had enveloped him, making him unable to move at all. His dull mind was taught a lesson by Wang Yuanshan. His face turned blue and red, and the corners of his eyes twitched for a long time. Then he gritted his teeth, turned his head, and shouted at his disciples, "Let's go." This time, the disciples of the Zhini school all cheered. Su Chan also widened her eyes and said in surprise, "No way. You can retreat by admitting defeat? Isn't that too exaggerated?" Hey, have you followed your heart today? Chapter 726. Su Chan looked at Yin Kong in disbelief, as if she couldn't understand why he would retreat when Wang Yuanshan had admitted defeat. However, Li Yundong laughed, as if all this was within his expectations. He said with a smile, "This man named Yin Kong is quite decisive. It's wise to give up decisively at this time." Su Chan asked curiously, "What do you mean?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "What else can we do if we don't give up? Can we still force Wang Yuanshan to enter the array? The strongest man in the world admitted defeat to you. If you think that he is really cowardly and doesn't have any real ability, then you are wrong. Anyway, it's already a huge gain to force Wang Yuanshan, who is said to be dead, to show up. Although we didn't test his true strength, we forced Wang Yuanshan to not dare to enter the array. This way, he can explain himself when he goes back." Su Chan nodded and said, "I understand. It's the same as Ding Nan's previous idea of quitting while you're ahead. Li Yundong chuckled and said, yes, that's right. The two of them muttered on the cliff. Seeing that Yin Kong was depressed by Wang Yuanshan, the disciples of the Shantian sect had no choice but to return to the crowd. Yin Kong glanced at Wang Yuanshan with resentment and secretly gnashed his teeth. His wishful thinking had been completely disrupted by this guy who had appeared out of nowhere. But as Li Yundong had said, he had not gained nothing. Anyway, this time it was just a visit to test the way. In other words, he had done a good job this time. Understanding this, Yin Kong decisively stopped pestering Wang Yuanshan. He snorted angrily, cupped his hands to Zhongling, and said, Zhenren Zhongling, we want to worship our ancestors. Please lead the way. Zhongling also breathed a sigh of relief. Since the other party had proposed to publicly worship their ancestors, it meant that there would be no rebellion at the moment. Moreover, it was impossible for the other party not to know where the way was, but letting them lead the way could also be regarded as a disguised compromise. When a sect displayed enough strength, the other party would naturally be polite and follow the rules of etiquette. However, if Wang Yuanshan did not show himself, then sorry, they would first beat him into submission and then let him lead the way. That way, the nature of the situation would be completely different. No matter what, he had passed this hurdle. Zhongling knew very well that his sect leader was now in the most critical period of his closed-door training. Although he occasionally went out with his yang spirit to pay attention to the world's events, he would never come out at this time to intervene in these matters. Even if there was a fierce battle at the foot of the mountain, he would not come out because he knew that as long as he was still there, the Jingyi school would not fall. But if he appeared rashly and was not strong enough, once he was knocked down, it would be a terrible disaster. Sometimes, admitting cowardice was a kind of realm. A real man was flexible. A dragon could hide beneath the 9 earths, but it could also soar in the 9 heavens. At present, Zhongling could even count with her fingers that the Spring Festival would be coming in a few days. After the Spring Festival, it would officially be the beginning of spring. After the beginning of spring, there would be rain. In the universe, thunder began with water. When the rain fell, all things were nourished and full of vitality. Then, when the thunder fell, all things grew, snakes and insects moved, the chi of the earth rose, and the weather fell. It was the best golden time to cross the thunder tribulation. Any great cultivator with a little experience knew that the golden time of the day was in the morning, and the golden time of the year was in the spring. The golden time of the day for cultivation was the few hours in the morning, and the best time of the year for cultivation was the beginning of the spring festival and the 2 solar terms after the spring equinox. After the spring festival, it was the spring equinox, and after the spring equinox was the Qingming festival. There was a poem from ancient times that said, during the Qingming festival, the rain fell, and the passers-by on the road were sad. It could be seen that during the Qingming festival, there was an excess of rain, and the air was extremely humid. Cultivators were most afraid of moisture entering their bodies. Crossing the thunder tribulation in this season was undoubtedly a very stupid and naive behavior. After the Qingming festival came the grain rain, and as the name suggested, the rain became heavier. After the grain rain came the beginning of summer. No cultivator in the world would be so bored as to wait until summer to cross the thunder tribulation. The reason was very simple. Although summer was the season with the most vitality, once the thunder was too powerful, the risk of crossing the thunder tribulation would multiply, and the rewards would not necessarily multiply. As for autumn and winter, only a fool would cross the thunder tribulation in these 2 seasons. Autumn was the season when all things withered, and the vitality was weak. Crossing the thunder tribulation at this time would yield half the results with twice the effort. As for winter, there was no need to talk about it. There was no vitality at all, and even if one was struck by lightning, it would be for nothing. Therefore, at this time, the top golden cultivators in the world of cultivation had long set their eyes on the spring equinox and the spring festival. They were all rubbing their palms and preparing to cross the thunder tribulation. From their point of view, as long as they passed the thunder tribulation, their cultivation would greatly improve, or even double. Even if they passed the 9 stages of thunder tribulation, they would directly leap into the realm of the 9th heaven of the fairy realm. Even if they were at least a human immortal. Once they became an immortal in the world, it would really be 9 transformations of carefree Tao fruit, 3,000 achievements, becoming an immortal. Jin Dan Jade Slip, Clear Edict, Crane Riding Cloud Chariot to Paradise. If they did not have enough fun in the human world, they would continue to play. If one day they were tired of it, they could ascend to the 9 heavenly nights heaven at any time and go to the immortal world to watch the fun. From then on, they would no longer have anything to do with the human world. For inner disciples like Zhang Tianshi, who had started cultivating in their mother's womb, their only purpose of cultivation was to ascend to become an immortal and go to the immortal world. Therefore, in their eyes, this kind of power struggle between the Shantian sect and the Longhu sect was just a small matter, far less important than crossing the thunder tribulation. Therefore, if cultivators like them were preparing to cross the thunder tribulation, they would prepare in advance, ignoring the outside world and wholeheartedly focus on crossing the thunder tribulation. Only a rookie in the cultivation world like Li Yundong would run around and fight for his life without preparing for the thunder tribulation at all. Therefore, Zhang Ling also knew that if Wang Yuanshan held a grudge this time and did not show himself, then they would be in deep trouble. Longhu Mountain might even have to change hands. Even if it was not easy to change hands, if Celestial Master Zhang was alarmed and delayed his lightning tribulation, then they would not be able to afford it. At this time, Zhang Ling saw that the other side had admitted defeat, so she quickly took advantage of the situation and walked down the mountain with Yin Kong without losing her manners. When she passed by Ding Nan, she looked at her with appreciation, bowed slightly, and said, "Jinren Ding, I wonder if you are interested in going to our ancestral court to have a look." Ding Nan was overjoyed when she heard this. She was a very utilitarian woman, always thinking about strengthening her strength and power. In her opinion, only by constantly growing stronger could she ensure that such a happy life would not leave her. Therefore, she had come to Mount Longhu to show her face in front of the heroes of the world. She hadn't expected that after being delayed along the way, the genie school would accidentally fall into her hands. Ding Nan nodded quickly. For a moment, she didn't even care about being reserved and said with a smile, "The Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One. I want to pay my respects to the 3 pure emperors." Ding Nan's flattery made everyone present look proud for a moment. Even the disciples of the Shantian sect who had a grudge with Ding Nan looked at her a few more times, as if they felt that this woman looked much more pleasing to the eye at this time. When Su Chan, who was on the top of the mountain, heard Ding Nan's words, she couldn't help wrinkling her nose and saying, "Ding Nan, how can you flatter me like this? I can't stand it." However, Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "This is not flattery. The Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One." Although this sentence is too flattering, it also makes some sense. After all, the current Jingyi school has integrated many cultivation sects from ancient times to the present. Judging from the history of Chinese Taoism, there is no Taoist sect earlier than the Jingyi school. In terms of influence, the Jingyi school deserves this sentence. Su Chan asked curiously, "Really? I remember watching TV saying that the martial arts of the world originate from Shaolin, but I've never heard of the saying that the Tao of the world originates from the Righteous One." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Your master taught you everything you know. Your master hates the Jingyi school to death. How could he say such things to you? Besides, can you take it seriously on TV? The saying that the martial arts of the world originates from Shaolin is a real falsehood. This is a sentence made up by Jin Yong. Without Jin Yong and the movie Shaolin Temple, the Shaolin Temple would never have reached such a level and scale. In Jin Yong's view, Chinese martial arts are powerful in ancient times, and the more modern they are, the worse they are. But in fact, it is the opposite. The peak of our Chinese martial arts was at the end of the Qing dynasty and the beginning of the Republic of China. This was the peak of Chinese martial arts in this chaotic world that had not been seen in 1,000 years. There were Li Shuwen, the Divine Spear, Li Luoning, the Divine Fist, Gui Yunshan, who conquered the world with half-step bursting boxing, Dong Haichuan, the eunuch master, Qing Tinghua, the 8 diagrams master, and Li Tsuni, the great master of national martial arts who was invincible before the age of 70. Not to mention Sun Lutang, the world's first-class martial arts master, Shang Yunxiang, Xue Ding, and others who are as famous as Sun Lutang. What is the Shaolin Temple doing at this time? The Shaolin Temple of these bald donkeys has been burned down. Have you ever heard of any Shaolin Temple in modern times that has a famous martial monk? 100 years ago, the most famous martial monk of Buddhism was Master Haidang. Unfortunately, he has nothing to do with the Shaolin Temple. Su Chan clapped her hands and said angrily, "It turns out that TV is all lies. I won't watch it in the future." Li Yundong laughed. "You can't stand it?" Su Chan pulled a face at Li Yundong. "The TV cheated me of my feelings. I don't want it anymore. I don't want it anymore." Li Yundong laughed. He really loved Su Chan's naivety. If it had been anyone else, it would have been creepy and pretentious. But Su Chan had an indescribable innocence and charm. The combination of these two temperaments made Li Yundong so infatuated with her that he could not extricate himself. Li Yundong smiled and patted Su Chan's cheek. Okay. Remember what you said. If I find out that you're secretly watching TV when we get back, you'll be punished according to the family rules." Su Chan stuck out her tongue and suddenly felt a little regretful. She looked at Li Yundong timidly and said, Can't I watch it on the computer?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Just as he was about to speak to her, he saw that the disciples of the Shantian sect and the Jingyi school, who had been at daggers drawn, had all gone down the mountain. Ding Nan was also following behind the team. Her disciples were also tactful. At this time, they finally stopped shouting the shameless slogan. However, Song Guohua was really a bit quick-witted. He made up a crooked poem on the spot and asked the disciples to shout loudly, "The Tao of the world originates from Jingyi, and the success of cultivation lies in Wuhua. The Great Way is everywhere, and the Zhenren of the world is one family." Although his poem wasn't very standard, the disciples of the two sects, young and old, all smiled when they heard it. They were very satisfied, and the anger from before dissipated a lot. Yin Kong even started chatting with Zhang Ling with a smile. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to tell that the two sides had almost killed each other just now. Li Yundong looked at them, who seemed to be harmonious on the surface, but in fact, were full of honeyed words and daggers. He shook his head secretly. Su Chan didn't notice this. She pulled Li Yundong's sleeve, pointed to the group of people, and said curiously, I think I see Hardadef." When Li Yundong had fought with the Japanese before, all his attention had been focused on his opponent, and there were thousands of people on the sidelines. How could he have noticed Hardadef hiding in the crowd? Even just now, his attention was focused on Ding Nan, Wang Yuanshan, and the others. Who would pay attention to the people on the sidelines? Hardadef? Li Yundong was stunned. Why is he here? Where is he? But at this time, the group of people had already gone down the mountain and was far away. How could he see clearly who was hiding in the crowd and the woods? Su Chan hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't see him anymore. Maybe I was wrong." But at that time, his back looked quite similar. Li Yundong smiled and said, "I saw Alba. It seems that she is doing well with Ding Nan. Fortunately, Ding Nan still has some humanity and didn't do anything to her." Su Chan rolled her eyes and looked at the field again. Suddenly, she didn't know when there had been another person on the field. This person's dress was fluttering, and she was long like a waterfall. There was a vermilion beauty mole between her eyebrows, and she had a small oval face. Her appearance was stunning. This beauty stood still and stared at Wang Yuanshan, who was on the field. Her eyes were full of hidden bitterness and infatuation, like a pool of autumn water. This person was none other than Ao Wushuang. Chapter 727. At a glance, Su Chan saw that her master had appeared in the field. She was shocked and couldn't help but let out a low cry. Li Yundong, who was beside her, quickly covered Su Chan's mouth gently, lest her voice be a little louder and scare the two of them away. At this time, Li Yundong's gossipy soul was burning. He was looking forward to the scene of this lonely man and woman meeting for 10 years. Su Chan held Li Yundong's big hand tightly with both hands and looked at Wang Yuanshan and Ao Wushuang without blinking. She was looking forward to the two of them getting back together, because in her impression, her master had never shown a really happy smile. Sometimes, even if she smiled at her, it was a kind of love and doting. She could still see the deep bitterness and loneliness in the depths of her eyes. If only master could get back together with grandmaster. The little girl murmured unconsciously in a low voice. Although she had complained that Wang Yuanshan had not left any news for Ao Wushuang in the past 10 years, she still subconsciously hoped that her master could be happy. At this time, Ao Wushuang looked at Wang Yuanshan with an extremely complicated expression. There was ecstasy, shock, resentment, anger, tenderness, and infatuation in her eyes. Li Yundong and Su Chan, who were watching from a distance, couldn't imagine how a person's expression could show such complicated emotions in an instant. For a moment, the empty side peak was extremely quiet. Wang Yuanshan and Ao Wushuang looked at each other quietly. No one spoke, only the wind on the top of the mountain whimpered, and it was silent. After a long time, Ao Wushuang said in a trembling voice, "Don't you want to say something?" Wang Yuanshan looked at Ao Wushuang quietly. After a moment of silence, he sighed softly and said, "Your stealth and hiding skills are still so powerful. I didn't notice your existence at all." Ao Wushuang smiled sadly. "It's been 10 years. Is that all you want to say to me?" Wang Yuanshan said slowly, "Yes, 10 years. 10 years have passed in the blink of an eye, but I feel like only a few days have passed." Tears kept rolling in Ao Wushuang's eyes. This strong, conceited, and arrogant woman was no different from an ordinary woman. Ao Wushuang said in a trembling voice, "But for me, every day is as long as a year. Do you know what it feels like to live like a year? Since you've been alive for the past 10 years, why didn't you come looking for me? With your strength, is there any place in the world that can imprison you?" Wang Yuanshan raised his head and sighed softly. "Wushuang, the world is a big cage. Even if I get out, I will just be jumping from one cage to another. What's the difference?" Ao Wushuang trembled with excitement and shouted, "There's a difference. I'm not in your confinement." Wang Yuanshan lowered his head and looked at Ao Wushuang with gentle eyes. He said softly, "Wushuang, look at your childish words. Aren't you and I in this world? We are all trapped in this cage, so we should be thinking about how to get out of this cage instead of being obsessed with this cage." Ao Wushuang couldn't believe her ears and eyes. This man whom she had held on to a glimmer of hope and waited bitterly for 10 years, was he really Wang Yuanshan? How could he say such a thing? Ao Wushuang finally couldn't hold back her tears. They dripped down like pearls from a broken necklace. She sobbed and said, "Wang Yuanshan, have you forgotten everything? Have you forgotten what you once said to me? Don't tell me you've forgotten your oath. Have you forgotten that you will stay with me until the end of time?" Wang Yuanshan was silent for a while, then he smiled softly and said, "Wushuang. The Wang Yuanshan you know is dead. He died when he was caught 10 years ago. Forget him. The one standing in front of you now is not Wang Yuanshan." After that, he sighed softly, turned around, and walked down the mountain. Ao Wushuang had never expected that she would get such an answer after waiting for 10 years. She only felt that her heart had been crushed into powder in an instant. She cried so hard that she could hardly stand. Su Chan couldn't bear it anymore. At this time, Su Chan couldn't help it anymore. She rushed down the mountain and hugged Ao Wushuang. While crying, she said, "Master, don't cry, don't cry. This heartless man is not worth your tears. Ao Wushuang grabbed Su Chan at once, threw her head into her arms, and began to cry like a child. The sound of her crying was so miserable that it really made people feel sad. But Wang Yuanshan seemed to have a heart of stone. He didn't look back in the midst of the crying and slowly walked down the mountain. Su Chan looked at his figure with tears in her eyes and couldn't help shouting, "Wang Yuanshan, you are ungrateful. I hate you." Wang Yuanshan paused slightly, but then he continued to walk forward. After a few steps, his figure disappeared in an instant. Li Jiandong watched this scene silently from the cliff. His burning desire for gossip had long since disappeared. At this time, his heart was extremely heavy. For a moment, he didn't know what to say or do. He couldn't help thinking of the lyrics of 10 years. 10 years ago, I didn't know you. You didn't belong to me. We were still the same. We accompanied a stranger and walked through the streets that we gradually became familiar with. 10 years later, we are friends and can greet each other. But that kind of gentleness can no longer be found a reason to hug. In the end, lovers inevitably become friends. The melody of this song rang uncontrollably in Li Jiandong's mind. He couldn't help but think, will Su Chan and I become like this in the future? As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Jiandong clenched his fists fiercely. No, absolutely not. No one can separate me from her. Thinking of this, Li Jiandong couldn't help but jump to the top of the mountain. He came to Su Chan's side, gently pressed his hand on her shoulder, and said softly, "Get up. Let's go back." At this time, Ao Wushuang was devastated and cried so hard that she fainted in Su Chan's arms. The little girl wiped her tears and stood up with her master in her arms. She sobbed and said, "Yundong, I'm so sad." Li Jiandong stretched out his hand lovingly and wiped away the tears on Su Chan's face. He comforted her softly, "Maybe Wang Yuanshan has his own difficulties?" Su Chan's eyes lit up and she suddenly said in a hurry, "Yes, there must be some difficulties." "Yundong, don't you think so? It must be like this. Master must have made a mistake, right?" When Li Jiandong said this, he didn't believe it himself. In his opinion, was there anything more important than being with the person he loved? Difficulties? Even if the sky fell down, the two of them would die together. **CK the difficulties. But these words could only be said in his heart. At the moment, he could persuade her as long as he could. Even if she knew that he was lying to her, with Su Chan's intelligence, it was impossible for her not to know that Li Jiandong was lying to her. But the little girl would rather be fooled and then comfort her master with it. Li Yundong smiled gently, nodded in self-deception, and said, "Well, he must have his reasons. Let's ask him again later. But, in my opinion, if Wang Yuanshan doesn't want to say it himself, I'm afraid it's useless no matter who asks." Su Chan felt much better. She hugged Ao Wushuang and said, "Yundong, let's go back. I don't want to stay here. I don't like it here." Li Jiandong nodded and said, "Well, let's go." The two of them took the unconscious Ao Wushuang all the way back. After leaving Mount Longhu, they flew to Tiannan City. By the time they got home, it was already late at night. After Su Chan put Ao Wushuang on the bed, she sat by the bed and looked at her master quietly. She had never seen her master have such a weak side, which made her feel so sad as if someone had pinched her with their hands. Li Jiandong accompanied her by her side. After a long time, Su Chan turned around and said softly to Li Jiandong, "Yundong, I'll sit with master for a while. Speaking of which, it seems that I've never been with her quietly for a night. Let me be alone with her, okay?" Li Jiandong nodded, kissed the little girl's forehead gently, and said softly, "Well, don't hurt your body. I'll go back first." As he said this, Li Jiandong walked to the door and suddenly turned around. He said gently, "Chaner, don't worry. No matter what happens in the future, I won't leave you. I'm not Wang Yuanshan." Su Chan turned her head and looked at Li Jiandong in a daze. Somehow, tears flowed down her cheeks. She smiled, wiped her tears, and nodded hard. Li Jiandong nodded and smiled at Su Chan lovingly, then went out the door. After going out, Li Jiandong raised his head and sighed. Just as he was about to go to his room, he saw Zi Yuan looking at him with sparkling eyes in the corridor. She asked curiously, "What's wrong with you? Why do you look like you're going to be separated forever? I seem to have heard you mention my master's name just now." Li Jiandong suddenly hesitated. He didn't know whether he should tell Zi Yuan about Wang Yuanshan or not. If she knew that Wang Yuanshan was not dead, he really didn't know what kind of thoughts she would have. But what kind of person was Zi Yuan? She was one of the most intelligent women in the world. Under her observation, she thought for a moment, and then her breathing immediately became rapid. Her eyes widened, and her voice trembled slightly. "Do you have news about my master? Is he really not dead?" Li Jiandong sighed and said, "Yes, I went to Mount Longhu with Su Chan before and happened to meet the overseas forces of Zhengyi School. The people of Zhengyi School were forced to do nothing, so Zhang Kongyun forced Wang Yuanshan out." Hearing this, Zi Yuan's body swayed slightly. Li Jiandong immediately took a step forward, held her with both hands, and asked softly, "Are you all right?" Zi Yuan seemed to be in a trance. She calmed down, forced a smile at Li Jiandong, and said, I'm fine. Let me be alone for a while." As she said this, she staggered back to her room. Zi Yuan entered the opposite door and went to her room. After closing the door, she leaned her back against the door as if she had lost all her strength. Her body slowly slid down. Unknowingly, her eyes were already full of tears. "Master, you really didn't die? If you didn't die, why did you abandon us back then?" Zi Yuan covered her mouth with one hand and sobbed silently. But Zi Yuan was Zi Yuan after all. She was different from Ao Wushuang, who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Ao Wushuang's emotions, which had accumulated for 10 years, burst out like a volcanic eruption, and she cried until she fainted. However, Zi Yuan silently shed tears for a while, then wiped her tears and stood up gracefully. Zi Yuan was a gentle person. When she suddenly learned of Wang Yuanshan's whereabouts, she only had questions in her heart, but there was no resentment or doubt. Her eyes were blurred, and she whispered to herself, "Master, do you know? The psalms you once told me have almost all come true now. But when I completely believe what you have to say, I know that you are not dead. What do you want me to do?" For a moment, Zi Yuan couldn't help but think of her master's figure in the past. Those scenes flashed before her eyes like a horse lantern. Every day she spent with her master was as ordinary as a clear stream in the mountains, like a breeze in the jungle. But after these scenes, she had received the news that Wan Hongling, the successor of Jindan's stage, had appeared in the Taoist temple. From the beginning, she had met Li Yunyang, witnessed him being struck by lightning, and taught him cultivation step by step. Then, she had been willing to destroy 2 magic treasures for him to survive the divine tribulation. The two of them got along with each other bit by bit. There were memories of earth-shattering battles, family trifles, and warm memories of the two of them sitting side by side in the kitchen. They were like mountains, rivers, and rivers. There were times when they were calm and low, and there were also ups and downs. Unconsciously, Zi Yuan sat down in front of the desk, picked up the inkstone on the inkstone in front of the desk, and gently ground the ink. Then, she gently picked up the brush on the brush rack, dipped it in the ink, and unconsciously wrote their names on the paper in front of her. At first, Zi Yuan was still writing Wang Yuanshan and Li Yunyang in turn, but then, when Zi Yuan had unconsciously written the whole page, she suddenly came to her senses. At a glance, she saw that Wang Yuanshan's name had only appeared a few times at the beginning, and then the rest of the paper was full of Li Yunyang's name. Looking at this piece of paper, Zi Yuan was lost in thought for a moment. Her eyes were blurred, and she was actually crazy. Chapter 728. Zi Yuan faintly looked at the note she had written and was a little obsessed. Just as she was in a daze, there was a sudden knock on the door. Soon. The sudden knock on the door awakened Zi Yuan. She hurriedly crumpled the paper full of words into a ball. Then, she watched as the ball of paper suddenly spontaneously ignited in her hand. After burning it to ashes and throwing it into the trash can, she felt relieved. She walked to the door and gently opened it. Zi Yuan looked at the door nervously, only to see that the person standing at the door was not the man who had made her heart beat wildly, but her shimmy, Ruan Hongling. Ruan Hongling looked at her Shiji strangely. She had rarely seen her Shiji panic and carefully hide her expression. She looked into the room curiously, then frowned and fanned herself with her hands. Is there a fire in your room? Zi Yuan calmed down and gradually recovered from her panic. She asked lightly, what's the matter? Although Ruan Hongling felt strange, she did not suspect anything. She entered Zi Yuan's room and opened the window to ventilate the room. Then, she sat casually on the edge of the bed and looked at her toes, as if hesitating whether to say what she wanted to say. Seeing her like this, Zi Yuan smiled and said, did you come to my room so late to study the size of your feet? Ruan Hongling raised her head and suddenly said quickly, Shiji Zi Yuan, we can't go on like this. Zi Yuan asked curiously, how? Ruan Hongling said with red eyes, I mean, we are being bullied. You have to find a way to repair the two great treasures of our Jingyi school. Otherwise, we will lose the position of the head of Linggong sect sooner or later. Zi Yuan didn't speak. She lowered her head in silence. After a while, she raised her head and said, you should know, the difficulty of repairing these two powerful magical treasures is no different from rebuilding them. It's too difficult and takes too much time. It's impossible. Ruan Hongling said anxiously, but we should try. Yes, I know it's too difficult, but Shiji, I really can't stand the feeling of being humiliated in front of everyone. If the Japanese hadn't come to mess things up this time, and if Li Yundong hadn't driven the Japanese away with great power, can you imagine what the situation would have been like? Zi Yuan naturally knew that her outcome and fate would be very terrible. A young woman like her would be imprisoned and face the wall. From then on, she would have to face the green lamp and the withered wall, ending her life. Zi Yuan was not afraid of loneliness and solitude. She was originally a woman with a light temperament and was not involved in the affairs of the world. If facing the wall and being imprisoned could eventually help her achieve the Tao and ascend to become an immortal, she could even stay at home for the rest of her life and never leave that small Taoist temple. But now, there was still a trace of reluctance in her heart. She was still thinking about the psalm that her master had left for her. This psalm was her life's destiny that her master had left for her. She had already uncovered most of it, but there were still some parts that she had yet to uncover. At the very least, she wanted to know the final answer and outcome before she faced all of this. Then, she would have no regrets. Moreover, behind this idea, there was a faint trace of reluctance. She was already somewhat used to such a life. If she suddenly left this place, would she be reluctant to leave? Would she regret it? Would she be sad? Would she be reluctant to do so? She didn't know. Deep in her heart, Zi Yuan didn't even want to think about this question. Sometimes, she was strong and calm, but sometimes, even if she knew that she would be hurt, she would be like an ostrich, unwilling to face these problems. Looking at the silent Zi Yuan, Ruan Hongling became more and more anxious, and her voice became louder. Shiji, master doesn't care about us, but don't you care? You. At this time, Zi Yuan suddenly raised her head and looked at Ruan Hongling with a complicated look in her eyes. She interrupted her softly, Hongling, master, he's not dead. Ruan Hongling's voice stopped abruptly, and the expression on her face froze. After a long time, her anxiety turned to shock, and then from shock to anger. She felt that she had been deceived, and a wave of anger rushed to the top of her head. Master is not dead? Then why hasn't he cared about us for the past 10 years? Then why would he rather watch us being bullied than come out to help us? The more Wan Hongling spoke, the angrier she became. Her chest rose and fell violently as she shouted, "How could he do this? It's fine if he left us alone for 10 years, but how could he watch his own sect be bullied like this? What kind of master is he?" Ziyuan sighed softly and said, "Hongling, master must have his own difficulties. Don't talk about it. At least we know that master is still alive. This is good news, isn't it?" Wan Hongling's eyes were red, and her voice trembled slightly. "Good news? For me, the good news now is that we need to repair those two powerful magical weapons as soon as possible." Ziyuan didn't speak again. She shook her head and said, "Don't think about it. It's too difficult." Wan Hongling stared at Ziyuan unwillingly. After a while, she stamped her feet and rushed out of the room. Soon, Ziyuan looked at Wan Hongling's figure and opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. However, she quickly swallowed her words and sighed faintly. She sat quietly in the room alone, letting the cold moonlight shine on her body, projecting a lonely figure beside the bed. It wasn't until the next day that the jade rabbit quietly left the sky and the golden crow rose from the sky again. Ziyuan was shocked to realize that the next day had already arrived. Ziyuan was slightly shocked. She felt that the warm sunlight was warming her body. She stood up gently and walked out of the door to prepare breakfast. However, early in the morning, she saw Wan Hongling rushing to the opposite door angrily. Ziyuan opened her mouth and shouted, but Wan Hongling rushed out without looking back. She sighed and shook her head. At this time, Wan Hongling rushed to Li Yundong's room angrily. She couldn't stand her Shiji's sometimes gentle personality. She wanted to ask Li Yundong for help and explain this matter to him. In order to help you get through the heavenly tribulation, Ziyuan broke the glass mirror and the purple gold luo jade plate. Do you know that? Even if you didn't know, now that you know, don't you think you should do something? Do you know how badly Shiji was bullied before? These words echoed in Wan Hongling's mind all night. She had been hesitating whether she should go to her master or Li Yundong. But after thinking about it, Wan Hongling finally chose Li Yundong, who was chivalrous and kept his promise, instead of the master who had a closer relationship with her but had left them alone for 10 years. Wan Hongling also had the key to Li Yundong's door. She opened the door roughly and rushed in. Her posture and movements made the little foxes who were practicing in the room early in the morning turn their heads to look at her in surprise. Wan Hongling ignored their gazes and rushed all the way to Li Yundong's room. She broke in without knocking on the door. But as soon as she entered, Wan Hongling smelled a strong fragrance of medicine. Li Yundong, who was wrapped up like a mummy, was lying quietly on the bed. Wan Hongling was stunned. Only then did she come to her senses. Li Yundong, who was invincible in the world, was still seriously injured and unconscious. Wan Hongling's eyes darkened. She bit her lips gently with her snow-white teeth and complained in a low voice, "Aren't you made of iron? Why don't you stand up quickly?" As she was speaking in a low voice, she heard a voice coming from behind her. "Hey, what's the matter?" Wan Hongling looked back and saw Li Yundong standing behind her, looking at her with a smile. His body was intact, and he didn't look injured at all. Wan Hongling didn't come to her senses for a moment. She was startled and unconsciously exclaimed, which made the little foxes in the living room laugh. But Wan Hongling quickly reacted. She rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said angrily, "You're injured. Why don't you be quiet?" Li Yundong cried out, feeling wronged. "Who was the one who wanted me to stand up immediately just now?" Wan Hongling blushed and argued, "I just think it's a little strange that you've been lying like this all this time. Aren't you always full of energy?" Li Yundong laughed. "Just take it as a vacation. Can't I rest for 2 days?" Wan Hongling had gotten used to bickering with Li Yundong in the past. For a moment, she forgot the purpose of her visit. She blushed and put on a posture as if she wanted to fight with Li Yundong for 300 rounds. However, Li Yundong smiled and said, Okay, stop it. Why are you looking for me? Ruan Hongling opened her mouth, but she hesitated. She stared at Li Yundong carefully. Just as she was about to speak, she heard a cell phone vibrating on the desk in Li Yundong's room. Li Yundong showed an apologetic expression to Ruan Hongling. He picked up the phone and glanced at it, only to see that it was a call from Lu Feier. As soon as Li Yundong picked up the phone, Lu Feier's clear voice came through. Thank God. I thought you had disappeared again. Hey, where are you now? Li Yundong chuckled. Me? I'm back in Tiannan City. Lu Feier said angrily, you're so annoying. You didn't even say goodbye before you left. It took us a long time to find you. I thought something had happened to you. You didn't answer the phone before. Li Yundong smiled and said, there was something urgent, so I left in a hurry. By the way, how's the crew? Where's President Chow? Is she okay? Lu Feier's voice suddenly changed, and she said very seriously, do you still remember Sister Chow? Li Yundong, I tell you, you're in trouble, big trouble. Li Yundong was stunned, and his heart trembled slightly. He thought to himself, could something have happened to Chow Kefi? No way. Chapter 729. Li Yundong's voice suddenly became low. He glanced at Ruan Hongling and showed an apologetic expression. Then, he walked to the side and asked in a low voice, what happened? Lu Feier sighed, and her voice suddenly became very helpless. You'll know when you come. Li Yundong frowned. Is it urgent? Lu Feier said, it's very urgent. It's best if you can come in the next second. Li Yundong's heart tightened. He nodded and said, then I'll be there as soon as possible. Bubble. Book. After putting down the phone, Li Yundong said to Ruan Hongling, Hongling, I have something urgent to do. I'll go out for a while. Ruan Hongling sighed and saw that Li Yundong had disappeared in the blink of an eye. She was so angry that she stamped her feet and said angrily, you're so annoying. My business is more urgent. As she spoke, she looked indignantly at Li Yundong, who was unconscious on the bed, and made a threatening gesture. If Li Yundong hadn't been seriously injured, she would have punched him already. Ruan Hongling glared at Li Yundong angrily for a long time before she stamped her feet and rushed out of the room. Li Yundong, who was rushing to Hainan, didn't know what was on Ruan Hongling's mind. He flew quickly with his young spirit body and found a place where no one was around to land. Then, he rushed to the Xin Hotel. When he arrived at the door of the hotel, he called Lu Feier and asked, where are you now? Lu Feier's voice was obviously stunned. You're back. So fast? Li Yundong said in a low voice, well, are you still in the room or in the studio? Lu Feier hesitated for a moment and said, we're in the room. Come quickly. Li Yundong hung up the phone without hesitation and rushed to Lu Feier and Chow Kefi's room. He pressed his hand on the doorknob and turned it, only to find that the door was not locked, so he pushed the door open and walked in. As soon as he pushed the door open, Li Yundong heard a pa sound and several black shadows rushed toward him. Li Yunyang was shocked. Although he was only at the Yang spirit realm at this time, he still had the experience of fighting and his spiritual power. At this time, he immediately subconsciously pushed his Jinqi forward, pushing it out like an invisible wall. The black shadows were immediately sent flying back. Puff! 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 The screams of a few women could be heard. At this time, Li Yundong took a closer look and saw more than a dozen people standing in the room. Some were holding firecrackers, some were wearing pointed hats, and some were holding toy trumpets. But no matter what they were holding, they all seemed to be frozen. They were staring in one direction, not at Li Yundong, but at the two women in front of him. Of the two girls, one of them had a cream cake covering her face. Her face couldn't be seen, and the cream cake obviously couldn't hold on any longer. It slowly slid down her face, revealing a sluggish face. Her eyes looked as if she had just been raped by 100 burly men, full of grievance and resentment. Li Yundong's eyes widened. For a moment, he couldn't recognize who the woman with the cream cake on her face was. But when he looked to the side, he was shocked. The other woman was none other than Chow Kefi. At this time, Chow Kefi's chest was covered with a strawberry chocolate cake. Her towering breasts provided a good angle for the cake. The cake did not slide down for a while, but the strawberries on it kept sliding down the ravine of her chest endlessly. Li Yundong was dumbfounded and stammered, What's going on? He turned his head and glanced at the other people in the room, only to see that the other members of the crew were in the room. Some were actors, some were stage managers, and Chris was among them. She was also wearing a clown hat and holding a firecracker in her hand. Her head was very low, but Li Yundong could tell from her shrugging shoulders that she was having a hard time holding back her laughter. Li Yundong glanced around, but no one answered him. Everyone seemed to be under a spell of silence. Li Yundong raised his voice. No one can tell me what's going on here? Seeing his surprised look, Lu Feier was so aggrieved that she almost cried. She quickly wiped her face with her hand and said angrily, Hey, it seems that I should be the one shouting, right? Li Yundong glanced at her, only to see that this popular idol was like a snowman with a face full of cream. She looked ridiculous. He couldn't help laughing out loud. Did you call me here in a hurry just to ask me to dress you up? Not bad, your fans will like your new look. Lu Feier was seething with anger. She quickly grabbed the cream on her face and flung it at Li Yundong. You bastard. You're pissing me off. Don't you know how to be kind to a woman? Lu Feier said. Seeing that she was throwing the cream at him, Li Yundong immediately changed his yang spirit to yin spirit, and the cream passed through his body. He chuckled and said, It's your own fault. Why did you lie to me? Look, now the retribution is coming, isn't it? When Lu Feier saw that the cream she had thrown had passed through Li Yundong's body, she suddenly widened her eyes. Her dark eyes looked even more ridiculous on a face full of cream. But after staring for a while, tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. After a while, she quickly wiped her tears with both hands. When Li Yundong saw the girl crying, he felt a headache coming on. He looked at Chow Kefi, who was beside him, as if asking for help. He saw that Chow Kefi was wiping the cream on her chest with a handkerchief. When she saw him looking at her, she rolled her eyes. Li Yundong saw that when she was wiping the cream, her chest was surging, which was really magnificent. He secretly took a breath of cold air and didn't dare to look at her anymore. He turned to Lu Feier and said with a wry smile, Hey, no way. You're crying now? I haven't cried yet. I came here in a hurry. I didn't expect that you would arrange a sneak attack. Fortunately, I reacted quickly. Otherwise, hee. Li Yundong didn't say the following words. Otherwise, if the news that Invincible Li, who had defeated the Japanese cultivation world with his own strength and was known as the Fighting Heavenly Master, had been smashed beyond recognition by 2 pieces of cake got out, he was afraid that it would become the biggest joke in the Chinese cultivation world. Those Japanese people would be so angry that they would commit suicide the next day. Thinking of this, a thought suddenly flashed through Li Yundong's mind. What will those Japanese do when they go back? Will they be willing? Will they keep their promise? But he quickly chased this thought out of his mind. He waved at Chris, who was not far away, and kept snickering with her head down. Hey, Chris, can you explain to me how all this happened? Chris asked, Can you explain to me how all this happened? Chris raised her head and looked at Li Yundong timidly, then at Lu Feier and Chow Kefi, who were embarrassed. She couldn't help but burst into laughter, but she immediately stopped laughing. She came to Li Yundong's side with a straight face, coughed dryly, and said, Master, today is Sister Chow's birthday, so we want to celebrate, but you are not here, so Lu Feier suggested. Lu Feier didn't wait for her to finish and immediately said loudly, Hey, you proposed to hit him with a cake. Chris's face changed greatly. She quickly waved her hands and said, "No, no. It wasn't me, I didn't." Lu Feier said angrily, "You were the one who suggested it. You said that it was popular in your country." Chris looked at Li Yundong with a terrified face. Like a child who had done something bad, she lowered her head and murmured, I just said it casually. The decision is up to you." Lu Feier pounced on Chris with her creamy hands and tried hard to wipe Chris's face. "You are the initiator, the accomplice, and the main culprit. You can't escape the punishment of the law." At this time, Chris had completely forgotten that she had also inhaled the divine aura of elixir. Her physique had long surpassed that of ordinary people by dozens of times. This blonde foreign girl was obviously living a good life in the crew. She screamed and played hide-and-seek with Lu Feier in the room. Watching from the side, Li Yundong felt both warm and funny. He couldn't help but think of what he had encountered before. The continuous fierce battles in Mount Longhu seemed to be very far away from him at this time. At this time, the heaviness brought to him by Wang Yuanshan and Ao Wushuang's 10 years of acquaintance also slowly drifted away. He looked at the frolicking Chris and Lu Feier with a smile. He glanced to the side and saw that Chow Kefi was wiping her chest while looking at the two of them with a smile. Her eyes were soft and warm, as if she enjoyed such a life very much. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he thought to himself, Chow Kefi doesn't seem to be completely controlled by the mystical silver fox, but this day will come sooner or later. What should I think of to help her keep her soul? Chow Kefi seemed to notice Li Yundong's gaze. She looked up at him, and her cheeks immediately turned red. Li Yundong saw that such a beautiful woman was so shy that she lowered her head. It was really beautiful. He immediately withdrew his gaze, coughed dryly, and said seriously, "Sister Chow, happy birthday." Chow Kefi calmed herself down. She raised her head and said with a smile, "Do you have any birthday present to prepare?" Li Yundong came in a hurry, so how could he have any birthday present? He thought for a moment and said with a wry smile, "Is a happy birthday enough?" Chow Kefi stared at Li Yundong with infatuation in her eyes. She smiled softly and said, "Yes, this is the best birthday present I have ever received." As soon as she finished speaking, Lu Feier shouted exaggeratedly, "Sister Chow, it's not fair. I gave you such a valuable gift, but you didn't even say that to me. I said, 'Happy birthday,' without any capital, and your bones became a little lighter. You don't value love more than friends, do you? I protest, I complain, I want to go to the crew to impeach you." Most of the people in the crew knew about the scandal between Chow Kefi and Li Yundong, and they all laughed. Chow Kefi's face turned red from the laughter. She flew into a rage out of shame and pounced on Lu Feier, scratching and scratching. "I'll let you say it, I'll let you say it." For a moment, there was constant laughter in the room. Li Yundong saw two beautiful women, one big and one small, shouting and rolling together. They were really fat and thin, lively and fragrant. Li Yundong looked at Chow Kefi, who was playing with Lu Feier, and suddenly said with emotion in his heart, "Sister Chow, if I help you keep your soul and memory, what do you think of this birthday present?" As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Li Yundong unconsciously smiled bitterly. It's really difficult to fight with the mystical silver fox for the body and soul. Chapter 730. Although a sudden birthday party had tricked Li Yundong from Tiannan City to Haikao City, Li Yundong still stayed with the mentality of taking things as they came. He smiled and watched the crew celebrate Chow Kefi's birthday together. As the birthday girl, Chow Kefi wore a pointy hat in the crowd. There were still some cream cake stains on her face and body, but this still could not hide her amazing beauty. This coquettish woman smiled like a flower in the crowd. Even a blind man would be able to see again after seeing her. His eyes lit up. The party lasted for more than an hour in the room before everyone calmed down a little. Some went to the spacious room to drink and have fun at the bar, while others gathered on the balcony to smoke and chat. Li Yundong stood alone in the corner with his back against the wall, quietly lost in thought. Suddenly, a woman's voice came from beside him. "What are you doing here? Don't you drink?" Li Yundong turned his head and saw that Chow Kefi had changed into a new set of clothes. The cake stains on her head and chest had long been washed away. At this time, she was wearing a red cheongsam. Her slender snow-white legs were faintly discernible from the opening of the cheongsam. Her black hair was coiled high behind her head, revealing her full and bright forehead and slender snow-white neck. She looked like a proud and noble lady. Chow Kefi was holding 2 transparent goblets in her hands. Each goblet was filled with a third of red wine. It was crystal clear, like liquid gems and flowing agate. Chow Kefi had obviously drunk a little too much. She looked at Li Yundong with blurred eyes, and the corners of her mouth were gently pursed, forming a playful smile. Li Yundong looked at the wine in her hand, smiled slightly, and shook his head. "I won't drink. Drinking alcohol is harmful to the liver. I advise you not to drink either." Chow Kefi giggled. She was obviously having a good time today. Her eyes were full of autumn waves as she smiled and said, "Life is full of joy. Don't let the wine cup be empty to the moon. When I met you a few months ago, you were still a wine fairy. Now you actually say that you don't drink anymore. TSK, you are not honest." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I had no choice. I had to drink at that time." Chow Kefi giggled and said, "Yeah, you're quite protective of the fairer sex. I haven't thanked you properly last time." Maybe it was the alcohol that gave her courage. Chow Kefi leaned over to Li Yundong, a little drunk, and giggled. "Hey, how can I thank you? You've helped me so much." Li Yundong quietly moved a little and said, "Sister Chow, didn't you help me a lot? Aren't we friends? It's only natural." Li Yundong was standing next to a counter, just 2 fists away from it. As soon as he moved aside, he made room for a person. Chow Kefi thought that Li Yundong was making room for her, so she immediately stepped forward and got in. As the saying goes, beer goes to the belly, white wine goes to the head, and red wine goes to the legs. When Chow Kefi took a step forward, her body suddenly staggered as if she was about to fall. Li Yundong didn't expect that Chow Kefi would take advantage of the situation. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had to hold Chow Kefi with both hands and persuade her, "Sister Chow, you drank too much." Chow Kefi giggled and said, "I didn't drink too much. You drank too much. By the way, you won't get drunk no matter how much you drink. I can't compare to you." Li Yundong supported Chow Kefi and said softly, "Sister Chow, let me take you back." Chow Kefi giggled and said, "Go back. This is my room. Where should I go?" Li Yundong saw that she was swaying, as if she would fall into his arms if he let go, so he said, "I'll take you to my room to have a rest." Chow Kefi looked at Li Yundong with her charming eyes and giggled. "Go to your room? Well, help me there. I'm going to drink with you all night." Li Yundong smiled bitterly and turned to look at the other people in the room. He saw that Lu Feier was chatting with Chris, but she glanced at him from time to time. Especially when she saw him supporting Chow Kefi, her eyes became more and more ambiguous and strange. In front of Li Yundong, there was a charming beauty who threw herself into his arms. It would be a lie if he didn't feel any emotions in his heart. People were not plants and trees. How could they be emotionless? Li Yundong was not a piece of wood. How could he not know what Chow Kefi meant to him? Moreover, in the past, Master Huefa, with his high cultivation, had almost set himself on fire in the face of the seduction of the mystical silver fox, let alone a strong Yuanyang boy like him. Li Yundong sighed in his heart and didn't dare to stay any longer. He supported Chow Kefi and walked to his room. Chow Kefi giggled as she walked. After entering the room, Chow Kefi gently struggled out of Li Yundong's hands and fell onto the bed. She giggled and said, "I'm so happy today. I didn't expect you to really come. I thought you wouldn't come today." Li Yundong smiled and didn't answer her. He just took off her high heels and carried her to the bed. After washing a hot towel in the bathroom and wiping her face for her, he said softly, "Sister Chow, sleep for a while. I'll go over first." Just as he was about to leave, Chow Kefi grabbed his hand and said with a pleading face, "Don't go. Talk to me. It'll be okay in a while." Li Yundong hesitated for a moment, nodded, and sat by the bed. When Chow Kefi saw him sitting down, she immediately breathed a sigh of relief, as if she felt safer and calmer with this man by her side. She murmured in a low voice, "You don't know. I've been exhausted these days. It's hard for me to have such a rest today. I haven't been so happy for a long time. You know, it's really tiring for a person like me to stay in this circle and refuse to be followed by others. When a man sees me, he thinks that I'm doing business by selling my body and wants to come up and take advantage of me. When a woman sees me, she thinks that I'm a prostitute, and her eyes are full of contempt." Chow Kefi let out a long sigh, and her eyes were full of resentment and grievance. Li Yundong saw it and sighed softly. "Then why do you still do this?" Chow Kefi raised her eyes slightly and smiled bitterly. "Then what do I do? Which line of work will I not be misunderstood by others? Unless I'm really a prostitute." Chow Kefi exhaled softly, and her breath was as fragrant as orchids. "At first, I just wanted to prove that I was not worse than others, so I worked hard. But I didn't expect that after such a long time in this line of work, I couldn't extricate myself. I couldn't figure out what else I could do in the future if I quit this line of work." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Sister Chow, you are so smart and beautiful. What can't you do?" Chow Kefi shook her head and said faintly, "Beautiful? It's not a good thing to be too beautiful. Sometimes, a woman is too beautiful, which is a kind of original sin. An ordinary man is innocent, but he will get into trouble because of his wealth. You've seen it before. Even a guy like Xiao Yuzhen wanted to take advantage of me, and I was almost killed by him. Fortunately, you're here." As she said this, Chow Kefi looked at Li Yundong with blurred eyes and said, "Tell me, are you my lucky star?" Li Yundong didn't say anything and smiled silently. At this moment, anything he said would be wrong. 1,000 words were not as good as a silence. Chow Kefi looked at Li Yundong faintly, as if she knew what he was thinking. She sighed and envied the girl named Su Chan in her heart. She also felt a little resentful at Li Yundong's unromantic avoidance, but more than that, she admired Li Yundong's persistence. The women around Li Yundong were very strange. The more infatuated he was with Su Chan, the more they admired him. The more they admired him, the more they loved him. It was as if they were stuck in a quagmire and couldn't get out. "Well, I won't embarrass you. Just accompany me and listen to what I have to say. Although Fei is a good person, there are some things that can't be said to her." Chow Kefi took Li Yundong's hand and murmured softly like a child. Throughout the night, she kept talking about her past until she fell into a deep sleep. Li Yundong saw that she had closed her eyes and was no longer talking. There was a soft snoring sound coming from her sinuses, and her body was lying on the bed. Because she was lying on her side, a deep ravine was squeezed out of her snow-white chest. This ravine was illuminated by the moonlight outside the window, and the shadows were really clear and layered. The exposed skin was as white as snow and as delicate as jade, enough to bury the lofty aspirations of any hero and martyr in the world. Chow Kefi's delicate red lips were slightly open, and she had a seductive posture that allowed him to taste her. Her eyebrows were filled with a soul-stirring charm. Although there was no gaze or seductive words, just the posture of her jade-like body was like a silent burning raging fire, burning people to the point that they wanted to turn into moths flying into the fire and pounce forward without any regard for their lives. The inferior seduction was nothing more than selling one's body, while the superior seduction was to move one's emotions, supplemented by looming temptation. If Chow Kefi had thrown herself into Li Yundong's arms as soon as she came up and seduced him, he would have left long ago. But she just begged in a low voice, wanting to talk to him. How could a man like Li Yundong, who had tender feelings for the fairer sex, have the heart to refuse? Li Yundong looked at Chow Kefi in front of the bed. He only felt as if there was a fire burning under his abdomen, teasing him. For a moment, his mouth was a little dry, and his mind was buzzing. He stretched out his hand slightly, as if he wanted to touch Chow Kefi's body, which was as soft as water. At this time, if it had been another man, he would have died under the peony and become a ghost. But Li Yundong quickly calmed down. He took back his frozen hand in mid-air, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Then, he gently pulled out his other hand from her hand, stood up, and slowly walked out. As soon as he went out, Li Yundong saw the door of Chow Kefi's room open. Lu Feier and Chris came out of the room with red faces. Although the two girls were about the same height, one had a black oval face, the other a golden oval face. One face was full of oriental classical charm, and the other was full of exotic charm. When put together, they were very eye-catching. Li Yundong could see at a glance that Lu Feier had obviously drunk too much, and her eyes were a little blurred. On the other hand, although Chris's snow-white cheeks were smeared with a trace of shame, her eyes were extremely bright. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "How much did you drink?" Chris opened her mouth and was about to speak, but Lu Feier rushed to say with a smile, "Not much. I drank 2 bottles. Chris is amazing. She drank 4 bottles. No man can compete with her." After drinking 2 bottles of wine, the after-effects were not small. Lu Feier staggered and couldn't stand still, but she still shouted that she wanted to go out to play. Li Yundong looked at the two of them and thought to himself, "That's not right." According to reason, Chow Kefi should be possessed by the soul of the mystical silver fox now. Her internal organs should be very strong, so she shouldn't be drunk. Could it be that it's not the wine that makes people drunk? Thinking of this, Li Yundong was silent for a while and sighed softly. In the room, Chow Kefi had also opened her black and bright eyes at this time. Her eyes were clear, and there was no sign of drunkenness. She looked at the ceiling quietly, as if she wanted to look straight at the sky through the reinforced concrete. After a long time, she let out a long sigh. Chow Kefi sat up gracefully and silently looked at the cold crescent moon outside the French window. Her eyes flickered with struggle, pain, infatuation, and confusion. However, these emotions were mixed together. After a long time, they slowly settled down, and another kind of cold gaze appeared in her eyes. The coquettish woman smiled coldly and said, "Wisdom King, good concentration, good concentration. Hey, you escaped with your life." Chapter 731. After that night, Li Yundong did not stay in the crew. He had wanted to say hello to Chow Kefi, Lu Feier, and the others early in the morning before returning to Tiannan City. However, because many of them had been crazy too late last night, they were still sleeping when Li Yundong arrived early in the morning. Li Yundong had no choice but to return to Tiannan City first. But as soon as he got home, he saw Lingyu, the little fox, coming up to him with her mobile phone. She said in surprise, Leader, you're back. You called just now." It was very inconvenient for Li Yundong to go out with his young spirit body, so he had left his phone at home. Hearing Ling Yu's words, he took the phone and asked curiously, "Who's calling?" Ling Yu blinked her eyes. "I don't know. They didn't say anything. They just told you to call her back when you're back." "It's a girl." Li Yundong smiled at her and asked, "Where's Su Chan?" "Still in the room? Your young martial uncle hasn't woken up yet?" Ling Yu shook her head. "No, Su Chan hasn't come out of her room yet." Li Yundong nodded and said to her with a smile, "Okay, I got it. Go and do your work." After watching Ling Yu leave, he turned on his phone and saw a number that had just called him. It was Feng Na's number. Feng Na, he thought to himself. Why is she looking for me? Could it be something that happened in the store? After Li Yundong dialed the number, he heard Feng Na sigh on the phone and say, "Boss Li, there's finally news from you. I thought you had already ascended to become a deity. Li Yundong chuckled. What happened? Feng Na could not help but say, hey, what are you talking about? Can't I look for you if there's nothing? You're really a hands-off shopkeeper. You don't care about this tea shop anymore? Shouldn't you at least show yourself? Li Yundong smiled and said, isn't it because of you, Manager Feng? Is there a need for me to take care of it? Feng Na sighed, but you have to come today, and you have to come right away. Li Yundong asked curiously, what's wrong? Feng Na said, Chris's family is here. They are having tea in the tea house now. Li Yundong was shocked. Huh? Her family is here? You found the tea house? What are you here for? Feng Na's voice sounded a little helpless. I'm here to look for Chris. I've already looked around the school, but you wouldn't answer my calls. So, I had no choice but to come here. I was shocked when I opened the shop this morning. Come quickly, I can't handle this matter. Li Yundong thought for a while and said, don't worry, you calm them down first. I'll call Chris first and ask Zi Yuan to bring her back later. Then I'll go to the Desanxian tea shop and see what they say. After Li Yundong hung up the phone, he turned around and went into the room, telling Zi Yuan about Chris. Zi Yuan knew that Chris had contributed a lot to the auction of the Medicine King tripod, and her cultivation heart was quite devout. She also had a great opportunity. She was a good seedling that could only be cultivated. Although her family had come here to take her back, they still had to listen to Chris's opinion. They couldn't make decisions on their own. After Zi Yuan picked him up, she immediately flew to Haikao. Ruan Hongling originally had a lot to say to Li Yundong, but seeing that he was busy rushing to the Desanxian, she had no choice but to swallow her words. After Li Yundong had explained everything, he hurried to the Desanxian. When he arrived at the intersection of the pedestrian street, Li Yundong saw Ching Cheng, who had been looking forward to it, standing on her tiptoes and waving at Li Yundong. She hurriedly caught up with him and complained, Hero Li, you're too mysterious. It's so hard to find you. Li Yundong looked at her with a smile and said, what? You didn't make up an excuse to trick me, did you? Ching Cheng punched Li Yundong on the shoulder and said angrily, what are you trying to trick? You're so heartless. We've been busy running this tea house these days. Is it easy? From purchasing goods to inspecting goods, from management to service, we're all naked. How could you say such sarcastic words? I'm so angry. No, I want a raise. Li Yundong laughed. Suddenly, his face turned serious and he said seriously, do you know what happened to Yao Jessen? Ching Cheng was stunned and didn't react. She said angrily, hey, you black-hearted capitalist, do you want to exploit and oppress us poor working people? Don't you know that asking for a raise is the normal right of working people? Li Yundong said seriously, I know, but it's a little miserable. Ching Cheng looked at Li Yundong with her mouth agape and asked timidly, how miserable? Will I be fired? You won't be so cruel, will you? Li Yundong said with a smile, no, the death penalty will be carried out immediately. Only then did Ching Cheng react. She laughed and punched Li Yundong again. You're so annoying. I didn't stab you 8 times. Li Yundong laughed and said, soon. Look at your resentful face. If you have a knife in your hand, do you think you can't stab me? Ching Cheng pursed her lips and smiled. I wouldn't dare stab you. If I did, someone would fight me to the death. Besides, if I stabbed you, who would pay me? Li Yundong laughed and bickered with Ching Cheng. Suddenly, he felt as if he had returned to school. He felt a little emotional. As he walked, he asked, by the way, how is the school now? No one wants to expel me, right? Ching Cheng said curiously, didn't you go through the procedures of suspension? Who would be so stupid as to expel the most famous student of Tiannan University? Hey, you don't know, but you are now the role model of our school. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He thought to himself, role model? Learning how to fight and PK people all day long? Ching Ching saw that Li Yundong didn't believe her, so she explained anxiously, you have to believe me. Now the student union is promoting you everywhere as a model for college students to start their own business. Your picture has been hanging on the publicity window of the school for more than a month. Li Yundong laughed. Don't be ridiculous. Feng Na is no longer the president of the student union, is she? Yan Hua should have been promoted, right? He hates me very much. How could he do the publicity for me? Ching Ching smiled proudly and said, this is the last thing Nana did after she quit the student union. You really should have seen the expression on Yan Hua's face at that time. It was wonderful. I suspect that he wouldn't have that kind of expression even if he ate a raw mouse. Li Yundong smiled and talked with Ching Ching as they walked. Soon, they arrived at the door of Desanxian. Li Yundong turned his head and saw that the door of Zhao's tea house was closed. General Tai was guarding the door. Obviously, it was closed for business. He couldn't help but be stunned and asked curiously, when did Zhao Yogan's shop close? Ching Ching thought for a moment and said, it seems to have been a while ago. I don't remember. It seems to have been a few days. What Li Yundong didn't know was that Zhao Yogan's soul had already left his body and he had died a long time ago. His property had almost been swept away by his two little sweethearts. When his family found that he was missing and his sweethearts had run away with his property, they immediately called the police. Zhao Yuzhen had been mean and selfish when he was alive. Once he died, his family naturally wouldn't be polite. In order to compete for his remaining property, they fought fiercely. All his real estate had been stopped for a long time and had entered the property evaluation stage. As one of his real estate, this tea house had naturally been closed long ago. Li Yundong thought for a while, but he couldn't figure out what was going on, so he didn't dwell on this issue. He smiled and said, well, one less competitor, and the pressure will be less. How is business recently? Just as Ching Ching was about to speak, she saw a man walking out of the door of Desanxian. He said unhurriedly, even if your tea house has no competitors, it will go out of business sooner or later. There was nothing more annoying than saying such unlucky words in front of a business shop. Li Yundong was secretly unhappy, but he didn't show it on his face. He turned his head and saw a man in a suit and leather shoes standing in front of him. The man was about 1.74 meters tall, with black hair and an Asian face. He looked quite delicate, with a pair of gentle gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. His hair was combed straight, and the leather shoes on his feet were shining like a mirror. The man stood on the steps and looked down at Li Yundong. Although his face was calm, his eyes were full of aristocratic superiority and contempt. Li Yundong thought for a moment and asked, you are? At this time, Feng Na, who had been waiting at the door, rushed over and quickly introduced, Li Yundong, this is Chris's. Before she could finish her words, another big man rushed out of the store. He was a typical American football quarterback. He was tall and burly, with unkempt blonde hair, deep eyes, and a high nose. The outline of his face was somewhat similar to Chris's. When the man saw Li Yundong, he immediately looked at Feng Na and Ching Ching. At this time, several little foxes on duty in the Desanxian store were also cheering and running toward Li Yundong. He immediately understood and shouted at Li Yundong with saliva flying everywhere. Li Yundong's English was very poor, and the man spoke very fast. How could he know what he was saying? He could only quietly avoid the man's saliva, then turned to Feng Na and said, what did this guy say? Feng Na looked at Li Yundong with some worry and whispered, he said that he is Chris's brother. Just now, he asked you why you kidnapped Chris to this poor and backward place. Did you seduce her? He wants to sue you to the local government and the court, and... No matter how good-tempered Li Yundong was, he couldn't help but frown and say in a deep voice, and what? Feng Na hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything. Instead, the young Asian man next to her sneered and said in non-standard Chinese, besides, Your shabby tea shop looks like it's going to close down at any time. If you tell us Chris's whereabouts immediately and promise not to interfere in this matter, maybe we'll buy your tea shop and let you have a way out. What do you think?" At this time, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Buy? Let me have a way out?" In Li Yundong's opinion, there was nothing more ridiculous than this. In the world, he was the only one who didn't want to give people a way out. Who would dare to say such words to him? Chapter 732. Americans and Chinese people did not understand each other's languages. Li Yundong's English was very poor, and this foreigner, who claimed to be Chris's brother, also did not understand it. If the two of them talked to each other, they would really be like chickens talking to ducks, staring at each other. Soon, but in this world, in addition to language, laughter was interlinked. Whether it was a joyful laugh, a happy laugh, or a cold laugh, people could understand its meaning without translation. What was most unbearable and obvious was the laughter that was filled with mockery and ridicule. Although Chris's brother didn't know what the Asian man beside him had said to Li Yundong's laughter really made him unhappy. His sister left a letter home and went to a distant country. It was reasonable to say that Westerners advocated independence and freedom, so they had no control over where his sister went. However, his sister had only left a copy of the letter for her grandmother. The others were completely in the dark. If they hadn't found out that they hadn't seen Chris for a long time and asked Lin Guiying, they wouldn't have known where Chris had gone. This matter made Chris's strict parents very angry. They couldn't imagine why such a good girl like Chris would put down her studies and go to a distant country like a psycho. Especially in the eyes of Chris's brother, since the last time Chris came back from China, she seemed to have become a different person. For God's sake, she had become like an Oriental wearing a Western skin. She kept mentioning Confucius, Mencius, and Zhuang to him. Damn it, do these ghosts who have been dead for more than 2,000 years have such great charm? When Chris's brother heard Li Yundong's laughter, he stared at him with a pair of bell-like eyes and shouted, "What are you laughing at? What's so funny? Where is Chris?" Li Yundong understood this sentence. He glanced at the quarterback in front of him faintly, turned his head, and said to the Asian man beside him who had spoken wildly, "Shouldn't you introduce yourselves first?" The Asian man pushed his glasses up and said in a reserved and arrogant manner, "My name is Han Zhen, Chris's fiancé. This is Chris's brother, Jim." Compared to Crazy's brother, Jim, the one who was even more upset was Han Zhen, who was standing next to him. Chris was a famous socialite at Pennsylvania State University. There was no one who didn't know her. It was impossible for a beautiful girl like her to have no suitors. Han Zhen in front of him was not only the one who pursued her the most fiercely, but his family and Crazy's family were also on good terms. When Crazy's family settled in Harrisburg, they once led the Chinese to fight against the local gangsters in the United States. The important allies of Crazy's family were this Asian man's grandfather's family. Almost there after the two families gained a foothold, Chris's family slowly turned to light industry, while the Asian man's family chose to run a business in the underworld. However, Han Zhen's father had been involved in the underworld business for a long time, and he always felt that he would run into ghosts if he walked too much at night, so he always wanted to clear his name. As a result, he naturally turned his attention to Han Zhen's close family friend. The old man of the Han family urged his son to work hard to pursue Crazy. Even without his father's urging, Han Zhen was also an admirer of Crazy and had pursued her since a long time ago. But when he was pursuing her fiercely, he found that Crazy had suddenly disappeared. After Han Zhen used his power to find out where Crazy had gone, he suddenly flew into a rage. He firmly believed that this bastard named Li Yundong was competing with him for a woman, so he immediately wanted to rush to Tiannan City to denounce him. But Han Zhen was a smart man. He knew that even if he came, he would not be recognized and might be hated by Chris, so he dragged Jim along. Looking at Jim's figure, one could tell that he was a single-celled animal with 4 limbs and a simple mind. After being slightly urged by Han Zhen, he immediately rushed to Tiannan City angrily. As the saying goes, a dragon has 9 sons, and each son is different. Contrary to Crazy's low-key and reserved character, her brother was a typical Western playboy. He was domineering and arrogant. If it weren't for the fact that he was in the territory of his country, he would have beaten Li Yundong at first sight. Although Li Yundong's cultivation was only in the Yangshan phase for the time being, he was still a famous cultivator in the world. Naturally, he couldn't argue with these two ignorant guys. Otherwise, people might laugh at him for bullying the weak. Li Yundong glanced at the two of them and walked into the hall of the tea house. He said lightly, "Crazy will come over later. If you have anything to say, you can tell her. If she wants to go with you, I won't stop her." Logically speaking, these words were reasonable. However, when Han Zhen heard them, he did not feel good. Because he had sent Crazy a lot of text messages and made a lot of phone calls before. On the one hand, he wanted to find out where she was going, and on the other hand, he wanted to persuade her to come back. However, Crazy didn't reply to his text messages or answer his phone calls at all. Han Zhen was sure that Crazy was hiding from him. Going to the country was just an excuse. Maybe someone there had made her lose her mind for a while and made her fall in love with him. Especially when Han Zhen saw Li Yundong for the first time, he was even more shocked by his temperament. He came from a big family. Although he had seen many outstanding peers, he had never seen a young man as handsome and elegant as Li Yundong. Therefore, Han Zhen immediately concluded that it was reasonable for Crazy to fall in love with this countryman in front of him. It was also because of this that even Han Zhen himself didn't realize that in his subconscious, a demon called inferiority complex was gnawing at his soul and heart, making him more and more jealous of this countryman named Li Yundong. Han Zhen was sure that even if Li Yundong asked Crazy to come, she wouldn't go back with them. Unless this countryman in front of him asked her to go back, Crazy would probably go with them obediently. Therefore, Han Zhen stared at Li Yundong coldly and didn't take what he had said to heart at all. He just said, "You might as well think about what I said just now. If you are willing to persuade Crazy to go back with us, I can consider buying your tea house and paying twice the price. How about that?" Li Yundong didn't even think about it and immediately said flatly, "No." Han Zhen didn't take it seriously. He sneered and followed behind him to look at the tea house. Although his voice was still calm, there was always a hint of sarcasm and contempt in his tone. He said, "Looking at the location of your tea house, and according to the country's real estate and market policies, I can infer that your tea house should be rented. Therefore, you are at best a rented and renovated shop. Looking at the effect of your renovation, it will cost you at most about 400,000 yuan. According to your other operating costs, your tea house is worth 700,000 yuan at most. I'll double it for you. 4 million yuan. Sell it to me and help me persuade Crazy to go back. How about that? 4 million yuan. The little foxes of the Fox Zen school looked at each other, and then one of them immediately said, "Wow, that's a lot of money. Will the leader sell it? If he sells it, he'll be rich." "Idiot, what will we eat if you sell it? How can you be so stupid as to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs? You're so stupid." "That's right. However, our tea house has not been doing very well." "Idiot, shut up. Aren't you afraid that the leader will be angry?" At this time, Li Yundong was no longer angry. He quietly listened to Han Zhen's chatter. He sat down at the tea table very calmly and smiled at the little foxes beside him. "What are you waiting for? Why don't you make me tea?" The little foxes seemed to wake up from a dream and went to make tea. Feng Na and Ching Ching stood to one side with worried faces. Li Yundong glanced at them and said with a smile, "Why are you standing there? Sit down, sit down." Feng Na and Ching Ching looked at each other, then secretly glanced at Han Zhen and Jim, who had ugly expressions on their faces. They then carefully sat down next to Li Yundong. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "How's the business of the tea house recently?" Feng Na hesitated for a moment, as if thinking about how to phrase her words, but Han Zhen sneered and said, do you still need to look at the business of your tea house? If it were a shop on the street, it would be fine, but it is in the depths of the pedestrian street, and there is no good parking lot around. Why would anyone come here to drink tea? If you continue to run your tea house like this, it will go out of business sooner or later. Why don't you think about the offer I gave you? Li Yundong turned his face and looked at him strangely. How do you know that if my tea house continues to operate like this, it will go out of business sooner or later? Han Zhen sneered and said, I've been waiting here for nearly 2 hours, but I haven't seen a single customer come in. Can your business be considered good? Besides, although China is the birthplace of tea culture, there are very few people who come to tea houses to drink tea. A tea house needs to do more catering business in order to survive, or it needs to have its own unique connections. Otherwise, it will definitely not be able to survive. Han Zhen looked Li Yundong up and down and said, looking at how young you are, I don't think you have any connections in the upper class, so it's only a matter of time before your tea house goes out of business. In all fairness, Li Yundong knew that Han Zhen's words were very realistic. If he was really an ordinary college student, opening such a tea house here would definitely be courting death. It would be strange if the business did not suffer losses in outer space. But the problem was Li Yundong an ordinary college student? Hearing Han Zhen's words, Li Yundong smiled slightly and didn't say anything more. He just looked Han Zhen up and down and smiled without saying anything. Seeing Li Yundong's reaction, Han Zhen was even more unhappy. He wanted to say something, but he saw that Li Yundong was ignoring him at all. What he had said just now was like playing the lute to a cow. Han Zhen secretly gritted his teeth and suppressed his anger. He slowly sat down at the table opposite Li Yundong and said in a cold voice, Miss, please pour some tea. The little foxes saw that this guy was very rude to their sect leader, so they didn't have any good expressions on their faces. A cute little fox held a teapot in front of him and snorted, pour it yourself. Han Zhen was so angry that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices, but he was also a shrewd person. He forcibly suppressed his anger and pulled Jim, who was about to make a fuss, to sit down and wait quietly to the side. After waiting for nearly 2 hours, it was almost noon. Li Yundong looked at the time and said to Ching Ching, how do you solve your meals? Ching Ching said, order takeout. Li Yundong nodded and said to Ching Ching with a smile, well, go out and buy it. Ching Ching answered and trotted out of the door. She was immediately delighted and said to Li Yundong, Chris is here. Although Jim didn't understand, he could still understand the words, Chris. He immediately stood up. Han Zhen was also delighted. He also stood up and wanted to go out to greet her, but when he moved, he saw that Li Yundong was calmly drinking tea beside him as if there was no one else around. He immediately stopped and slowly sat down again, as if he wanted to compete with Li Yundong in terms of bearing all the time. Jim didn't care so much. He quickly walked out and saw Chris rushing over. He didn't even have time to look at Zi Yuan, who was next to him, and shouted at Chris. Chris was also a very assertive person. She raised her eyebrows and stood at the door of Desanxian, talking loudly with her brother in English. Zi Yuan, who had followed them, glanced at them and entered the tea house. She glanced around and walked toward Li Yundong with a smile. At first, Han Zhen was still drinking tea calmly, but when he glanced around and saw Zi Yuan, he was so shocked that he didn't even notice that the tea in the teacup had been poured on his body. He shouted crazily in his heart, how could there be such a beautiful woman? Especially when he saw this fairy, who was like a fairy descending to the world, walking toward Li Yundong and smiling at him like a flower. A surge of jealousy almost burned him to ashes. What's so great about this guy? Not only did he win Chris's favor, but he also has such a fairy by his side. Zi Yuan didn't know that Han Zhen was so jealous. She smiled and said to Li Yundong, how is the tea house's business? Li Yundong smiled and said, it doesn't seem to be very good. Zi Yuan smiled gently and comforted him, it's okay. Business will get better. I saw that the tea house of Zhao across the street has closed, which means that we have one less competitor. Li Yundong chuckled. Before he could say anything, he suddenly saw Jim waving his arm, pointing at himself and then the tea house, roaring loudly. Li Yundong frowned secretly and asked Feng Na in a low voice, "What did they say?" Feng Na hesitated for a moment and said, "Jim said that our tea house is a joke and a pile of shit. If Chris doesn't go back with him, he will buy the tea house across the street along with this shit like Desanxian and let you have a taste of living on the streets and having nothing." Li Yundong didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed and said, "Nothing? Living on the streets? I've tasted it. I don't need his service. Tell him that not only will I not sell this tea house, but I will also open it all over the world in the future." As soon as he said this, not only was Feng Na tongue-tied, but her eyes were full of disbelief. Even the little foxes shook their heads secretly, not believing Li Yundong's words. Han Zhen was even more stimulated by Li Yundong's arrogant words and couldn't help laughing wildly, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. "Your broken tea house can open all over the world? I'm dying of laughter. If you can open it all over the world, I will be the President of the United States." Chapter 733. Han Zhen's words were so arrogant that Chris, who was at the door, looked at him. When Chris saw him, she frowned and walked in quickly, shouting, "Why are you here?" Although Han Zhen was shocked by Zi Yuan's beauty, he was more interested in Chris's family background. If he could marry Chris, it would be a great benefit to his family. Because of this, Han Zhen immediately put away the arrogant smile on his face and returned to his usual gentle face. He smiled slightly and said to Chris in English, "Chris, why did you come here without saying hello?" Chris had been ignored by Li Yundong a few days ago. Although she had been very happy with Lu Feier and the others, she had been very tired. She had thought that she had come to China to learn cultivation, but she had accidentally ended up shooting a TV series. In particular, Li Yundong's words had made her rush from Haikou to Tiannan City, more than 1,000 kilometers back and forth. Even a clay figurine would be a little angry if she were to be bossed around like this. However, Chris didn't dare to vent her anger on Li Yundong, so she vented all her anger on Han Zhen. Chris had never liked Han Zhen, who had a gangster background. After hearing his words, she frowned and said to him in Chinese, "Who are you to me? Why should I say hello to you? Do I need to tell you where I'm going?" This sentence almost made Han Zhen choke. He choked for a moment, and a flash of anger flashed in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. He chuckled. Seeing that Chris was speaking to him in Chinese, he also said in Chinese, "Chris, I just care about you, especially your family. They care about you even more. Your brother Jim is concerned about your safety, so he specially invited me here to find you." Although Chris felt that she was being suppressed by Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin in terms of beauty, temperament, and cunning, she was still a first-class woman in front of others. She glanced at her brother and immediately sneered, "Han, don't use my brother as a shield. Don't I know what kind of character he is? If you hadn't instigated him, would he have come here?" Han Zhen frowned and looked at Jim for help. Although Jim didn't know what they were talking about, he was not an idiot. Looking at their expressions, he knew that Chris had embarrassed Han Zhen. He immediately said, "Chris, why are you helping an outsider? Don't you know that father has already agreed to your engagement with Han?" Chris was so shocked that her eyes immediately widened. She subconsciously used her mother tongue and said, "What? Me? He Han? Hell, who agreed? Why am I the last person to know about my marriage?" The more Chris thought about it, the angrier she became. She furrowed her brows and glared at Han Zhen. "Are you the one behind this?" Han Zhen sighed and said to Chris with sincerity, "Chris, I really love you." As he spoke, he glanced at Li Yundong, who was drinking tea leisurely, and said with ulterior motives, "You're different from some people." Chris said angrily, "He's my master. Be more polite when you speak." Han Zhen frowned and glanced at Li Yundong disdainfully. "Master? What did you learn from him?" Chris was stunned when she heard this. After getting along with Li Yundong and other cultivators these days, she also found that cultivators like Li Yundong usually kept a low profile and didn't want others to know their true identities. She couldn't say in front of Han Zhen that she had come to China to learn cultivation, so she could only bite the bullet and say, "What I learn has nothing to do with you." Han Zhen was stabbed by her again, so he had no choice but to continue asking Jim for help. At this time, Jim said, "Chris, our family misses you very much, and so does Grandma. She asked me to find you and take you back. Do you have the heart to leave us in such an ignorant and backward place? Did this man use some magic to enchant your soul?" If Jim had been reasonable, he might have been able to persuade Chris, but he had mentioned Lin Guiying. This made Chris instantly think of what Lin Guiying had once said to her. Chris immediately understood that her grandmother would miss her, but when she had said that she wanted to come to China to be apprenticed to a master for cultivation, her grandmother had not only not stopped her, but had also greatly encouraged and praised her. Chris thought quickly and instantly concluded that Jim must have faked the imperial edict, using her feelings for Li Yundong to coax her to go back. She immediately sneered and said, "Jim, first of all, Grandma agreed that I came to China. Secondly, this is not an ignorant and backward place. On the contrary, it is a magical and charming country with a profound culture of 5,000 years. I like this culture, and it is the charm of this culture that has fascinated me." When Jim saw his sister talking back to him in public, he felt a little embarrassed. However, Chris was usually very doted on by her parents, and she was fair and modest. She had a lot of prestige in the family, and he listened to his sister's words in many things. He was angry, but he didn't dare to do it to Chris. He could only turn the gun and fire at Li Yundong. He shouted angrily, "Hey, you yellow monkey, if you don't persuade Chris to go back, I'll break your bones." His words also scolded Han Zhen. The corners of Han Zhen's eyes twitched when he heard this, but he couldn't make a sound. Li Yundong saw that he was shouting at him in a stern voice. Obviously, he was not saying anything nice. He took a sip of tea unhurriedly and said to Feng Na, "What is he talking about?" Feng Na was not willing to translate these words to Li Yundong. She had seen Li Yundong fight at school many times. She knew that if she translated these words, there would be a full-scale fight here. She was not worried that Li Yundong would be at a disadvantage in a fight. In her opinion, Li Yundong was a living immortal. She was only afraid that if someone rushed here with their underwear on, Li Yundong could also beat them until they wore their underwear inside out and rushed back dejectedly. But if they really fought, these two were foreigners. In China, it would be a trivial matter if you beat a Chinese person, but if you beat a foreigner, it would be a big trouble. If they investigated, it would alarm the foreign consulates. Feng Na's hesitation made Han Zhen, who was beside her, keenly aware of her timidity. He sneered and said to Li Yundong in Chinese, "I don't care if you are Chris's master or who you are. Anyway, you can't have anything to do with her anymore. Otherwise, I will definitely make you suffer." Li Yundong was amused. He held the teacup and drank the tea while looking up at him. He was like a lion lazily looking at a dog barking at him. "Oh. Why do you want me to suffer the consequences?" Han Zhen gritted his teeth and was about to say something harsh when he saw Ching Ching suddenly rush in with 2 plastic bags filled with fast food. She shouted at Li Yundong from afar with a surprised face, "Hey, Li Yundong, there are a lot of Japanese people outside asking about you. What did you do? Did you blow up the Yasukuni shrine?" Her words stunned everyone in the hall except Jim. The little foxes were naturally lively, so they hurriedly ran to the door and looked around. Sure enough, they saw many people holding colorful flags of tourist groups printed with Japanese characters walking along the street. One of them was bending down to ask passers-by about something. At this time, he happened to raise his head and look at Desanxian. When the little foxes met his eyes, they immediately shrank their heads in fright and chattered to Li Yundong, "Leader, it's not good. The Japanese are here again." Li Yundong glared at them with a straight face and said in a deep voice, "What are you panicking about? I'm here. Seeing that he was sitting as still as a mountain, the little foxes were relieved and stayed obediently by his side. Ziyuan, who was standing to one side, said in a low voice, "Li Yundong, this is a busy city. You should control yourself and don't get into a conflict with them. If you really can't do it, let me do it." Li Yundong chuckled and said noncommittally, "These guys don't keep their word. I just beat them away, but they came back shamelessly. Hey, are they tired of living?" As the two of them spoke in low voices, Han Zhen and Jim looked at each other. They didn't know what was going on, so they had to sit aside patiently and wait to see what would happen. Li Yundong sat at the tea table in the middle of the hall, staring at the door with a sneer on his face. It seemed that he wanted to see which familiar face would appear in front of him in a while. The cultivation world of China and Japan was separated by a strip of water. Many Japanese cultivators were proficient in Chinese, and there were also many Chinese cultivators who were proficient in Japanese. Ziyuan didn't speak English, but she was proficient in Japanese. When she saw the flag, her expression suddenly became strange, as if she wanted to laugh. She quickly glanced at Li Yundong and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. She held back her laughter and wanted to see his reaction. When Li Yundong saw such a group of people, he was also stunned. He looked at the clothes of this group of people. It was really the style of the movie Men in Black. They were black from head to toe, and these people were all sturdy. Tattoos could be seen on the exposed skin of their clothes and necks, as if they were a group of gangsters traveling. Li Yundong's expression was strange, and he couldn't help looking at this group of people. This group of people also glanced at the plaque of the tea house in unison, and then at the shop in unison. One of them had a ferocious face, and at first glance, it was obvious that he was not a good person. He said loudly in strange Chinese, "Excuse me, is this Li Yundong's tea house?" Feng Na and Ching Ching, who were standing to one side, saw that this group of people did not seem to be good people at all. The murderous aura of this group of people was extremely strong, and it was the style of gangsters. The two of them were so scared that their faces turned pale. They thought that the gangsters had come to seek revenge. Feng Na involuntarily tugged at Li Yundong's sleeve and said nervously in a low voice, "Li Yundong, don't agree with him. Leave this to me. Hurry up and leave." Li Yundong looked at her and his heart skipped a beat. His eyes also softened a little. He chuckled and said, "Don't worry, these people are nothing to me." Although his voice was low, Han Zhen, who was next to him, heard it clearly. He immediately sneered disdainfully. Li Yundong ignored him and raised his voice to the Japanese people outside. "I am Li Yundong. What do you want?" The man who had spoken was suddenly stunned, and his eyes lit up. Are you Li Yundong?" Li Yundong stood up. Although there was a faint smile on his face, he was already secretly vigilant. As long as the other party had any evil intentions, he would immediately attack first. Li Yundong put his hands behind his back and said, "Yes, I am Li Yundong. What do you want?" The man in the lead immediately took 2 steps forward with an aggressive posture. The little foxes on the side were all shocked and subconsciously stopped in front of Li Yundong. But as soon as they moved, they saw this fierce-looking guy's momentum was like a rainbow, and his momentum was astonishing. He knelt down on the ground. The fierce-looking guy banged his head 3 times and shouted loudly in Japanese. Then, the group of men in black behind him repeated this sentence and knelt down in unison. For a moment, a large number of people were kneeling in front of the Desanxian. For a moment, everyone inside and outside the Desanxian was stunned. Han Zhen and Jim, who had wanted to see Li Yundong make a fool of himself, almost dropped their jaws to the ground. The hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Li Yundong was also dumbfounded. What's going on? What's wrong with these Japanese people? Could it be that the battle at Mount Longhu had made them lose their minds? Chapter 734. For a moment, except for Ziyuan, everyone else in the Desanxian store was stunned. Even Li Yundong was dumbfounded and couldn't react for a while. After a while, he turned his head to look at Zi Yuan with the corner of his eyes twitching. "You soon." But at a glance, he saw that Zi Yuan was pursing her lips. The corners of her mouth were about to rise to the sky, and her eyebrows were also curved. Li Yundong immediately said in a low voice, "Hey, what the hell is going on? You are so unkind. Are you watching me make a fool of myself?" Zi Yuan gently covered her mouth and whispered with a smile, "They are worshipping you." "Worshipping me?" Li Yundong felt as if he had heard the funniest thing in the world. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Why do these guys look like gangsters? Why are they worshipping me?" Zi Yuan pursed her lips and whispered with a smile, "Isn't it because you are the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King?" Li Yundong's eyebrows twitched again. "I am the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King. What does it have to do with these guys?" Zi Yuan explained with a low smile, "Although I can't see the origin of these people, I can see that they are carrying the banner of the Saki Corporation. As far as I know, the Saki Corporation should be a company group under the Saki Group of the Wakayama Prefecture branch of the Yamaguchi-gumi." As soon as Zi Yuan said this, Li Yundong suddenly understood. The headquarters of Jinyan Tantrism, Mount Koya, was located in Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. This place could be said to be the most powerful place of Jinyan Tantrism. Other sects in the cultivation world could not enter, and the local people naturally believed in the Buddha and the immovable Wisdom King. Since ancient times, in addition to the common people at the bottom, there were three special groups of people who believed in the gods the most. The first was the officials, the second was the businessmen, and the third was the underworld. Even in China, under the feudal rule of 2,000 years, no matter which dynasty or generation could escape this rule. Only after the establishment of the new country, the traditional survival of the cultivation world was almost swept away. The people at the bottom did not believe in the gods. The officials did not dare to believe in them openly because of their atheism, but in private, there were many people who donated and burned incense in order to accumulate some good karma. As for those who were businessmen and those who walked the underworld, they still believed in the same thing. Each of them was more devout than the other. In mainland China, it was still considered better, but in Hong Kong and Taiwan, it was more prevalent. If China was already like this, there was no need to mention Japan. In Japan, the forces of the cultivation world were unbelievably huge. Not only did they reach deep into the government, but they were also entangled with the underworld forces. They even colluded with each other and provided each other with supplies. The people in the underworld lived on the edge of a knife every day. Therefore, they believed in the gods very much. When the leader of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest gang in Japan, passed away, they must invite an eminent monk to perform a ritual. Almost there, but this was only on the surface. In 2009, Shingen Tantrism had secretly accepted private donations and bribes from Yamaguchi-gumi. After this matter was exposed by reporters, it caused a sensation throughout the country. At that time, 10 abbot of Mount Koya resigned collectively due to the anger of the people. Although this matter was suppressed in the future, this matter was only the tip of the iceberg on the surface. From a glance, it could be seen that the collusion between the Japanese gangs and the Japanese cultivation world had been going on for a long time and was deeply rooted. A few days ago, the Japanese people formed a group to come to China to play dungeons. They came aggressively and returned dejectedly. Not only were they beaten to the point of losing levels, but even their equipment was almost destroyed by Li Yundong. After these Japanese cultivators returned home, they remembered that they had shouted before they went to kill the Chinese people and blow up all their equipment, and they felt ashamed. But after all, the defeat couldn't be covered up. Not to mention other things, Takahashi Shota of the Pure Land True Sect's Imperial Shadow Hall had been destroyed, and his account had been wiped out by Li Yundong. Even if his file had been deleted, the Tiantai sect was not much better. The leader of the sect had been killed by Li Yundong and deleted his account. Fortunately, his corpse had been snatched back. Finally, he was naked and did not have his equipment dropped by others. Jinyan Tantrism was not much better. Changxing Vidra's fate was exactly the same as Takahashi Shota's. The three giants of Japanese Buddhism had been beaten miserably by Li Yundong, and the forces of Shintoism were not much better. They had been beaten by Li Yundong. Although they felt aggrieved when they went back, they really respected Li Yundong like a ghost. Li Yundong had insisted on fighting to the end, and he had indeed beaten these Japanese people until they were convinced. Moreover, under the encouragement of Ise Xinguang and the others, these pioneer groups of the Japanese cultivation world, who had been wiped out in the dungeon, had long unified their statements. They insisted that it was because the boss, the reincarnated Wisdom King, was too abnormal, not because their level was low and their equipment was incompetent. In this way, it spread to 2 people, 3 people, and countless people. For a time, the Japanese cultivation world knew that the Japanese cultivation world had been defeated by a reincarnated Wisdom King named Li Yunyang. Now, several major sects had given up and no longer mentioned going to China to play dungeons. Even if there were some who were not convinced, they could only complain in private. They knew that if they went to China to play dungeons, they were afraid that losing a level would be a light punishment. Originally, if a fight only led to losing experience in a level, it would be fine. If their accounts were wiped out by the boss and their accounts were banned, who could afford to be hurt? Who would play with them? However, there was no GM in the Japanese cultivation world. They wanted to complain to the upper echelons, but because of their face, they could only pinch their noses and bear it. However, the cultivation world swallowed their anger, but the underworld forces closely related to the cultivation world did not think so. No matter from which aspect, the Japanese Yamaguchi-gumi was the top 5 big bosses of the world's underworld forces, and this group of evil gangsters believed in Buddhism the most. Almost all of them even had Buddhist gods tattooed on their bodies. Among them, the 5 Wisdom Kings and Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva were the gods with the highest rate of tattoos. Yusun the immovable Wisdom King was the king of all Wisdom Kings and the king of all Wisdom Kings. He was very good at fighting and PK. Any Trailokaya Vijaya, Junshali Wisdom King, Mahavira Wisdom King, or Vajrapani Wisdom King would be nothing in front of the immovable Wisdom King. Such a big boss, the great God King, if the underworld did not believe in it, who should they believe in? Could it be that they would believe in the smiling Maitreya Buddha? If it weren't for the strict requirements of the organization's tattoo pattern, and only the boss was qualified to tattoo the immovable Wisdom King on his body, I'm afraid that everyone in the Yamaguchi-gumi would have tattooed the immovable Wisdom King on his body. The main forces of the Yamaguchi-gumi were concentrated in the Kyoto and Osaka areas of Japan. The Benshi Temple of the Pure Land True Sect, the Yanli Temple of Mount Hai of the Tiantai Sect were in Kyoto, and the Kongabu Temple of Mount Koya of the Jinyan Tantrism was also near Osaka. It could be said that this place was a sensitive area where the forces of Jinyan Tantrism, Tiantai Sect, and Pure Land True Sect intersected. When the news that Li Yunyang had defeated the 3 giants of Japanese Buddhism spread out, all the members of the Yamaguchi-gumi in Japan were shocked. Everyone was stunned and couldn't believe their ears. Immediately, there were people from the Yamaguchi-gumi who questioned this result. They couldn't believe that the 3 major Buddhist forces they believed in had been completely defeated by a Chinese man. But soon they found out that it was the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King who had defeated the 3 giants. How could this be? The Yamaguchi-gumi almost went berserk, and the crowd was in an uproar. Firstly, due to their identity and status, the bosses were still able to restrain themselves. Secondly, they were internationally known, so they were being watched wherever they went. Therefore, they were still able to sit calmly. However, even though they could sit still, their subordinates started to make a ruckus. What? The reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King is in the Chinese? Fuck, how did the immovable Wisdom King reincarnate to the Chinese? This is too disrespectful to our Japanese, isn't it? But the Chinese Buddhism is the best in the world. If the immovable Wisdom King doesn't reincarnate there, where will he reincarnate? Besides, the river flows east for 30 years, and the river flows west for 30 years. Who knows if he will be reincarnated here in the future? Forget it, Buddhism doesn't discriminate between races, and gods don't discriminate between national boundaries. The most important thing is to pay homage to the immovable wisdom king. When I come back in the future, I can brag. I have seen the immovable wisdom king. How cool will it be in the future? The Japanese people's feelings for their country were very complicated. They worshipped the past and suppressed the present. It could be said that they worshipped the ancient history of their country, but they also despised everything about their country in modern times. The immovable wisdom king was also part of the ancient culture in the Japanese people's cognition. Over the years, many people had gone to the country to make a pilgrimage just to remember the dead Buddhist ancestors. At this time, they suddenly heard that a reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king was still in the world. How could it be? Understanding this, the believers of the Japanese Yamaguchi-gumi set off to Tiannan City in a mighty manner. However, there were more than 38,000 members of the Japanese Yamaguchi-gumi. If all of them came to the country, then there would be no work to be done here. It would be enough to keep an eye on these Yamaguchi-gumi, who never meditated and only knew how to kill and set fires. Therefore, after a discussion, they decided to send Nishikyu Haruo, the 6th-generation leader of the Sasaki group in Wakayama Prefecture, to explore the way in Shina. Nishikyu Haruo was tall and strong, with a fierce face. Even if he was wearing sunglasses, a scar could be seen from the corner of his eye to his neck, as if there was a red reptile crawling on his face and neck. The leader of the Sasaki group knelt on the ground, almost prostrating himself. His hands were pressed in front of him. One of his hands was missing 2 fingers. Obviously, he had violated the clan rules and had been cut off. The leader was usually very fierce, but at this time, in front of Li Yundong, he was as docile as a sheep. He knelt on the ground obediently and spoke Japanese. But after a while, he saw that Li Yundong did not move, so he boldly looked up. At first glance, he saw that the young man was looking at him with flashing eyes and a strange expression on his face. Nishikyu Haruo's heart skipped a beat and he thought to himself, how could the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king be so young? It can't be fake, can it? Japan was a country that was very particular about the order of merit. Almost everything had to be done based on seniority and seniority. When there were elders around, young people could not speak easily. Sometimes, no matter how talented young people were and how reasonable their words were, no one in society would listen attentively to them. They would rather listen to the words of those older people. That was because in their subconscious, young people still needed to be tempered and needed to listen more. It was not the time for them to speak more. With such a mentality, Nishikyu Haruo began to doubt Li Yundong's identity. He asked tentatively in Japanese in a low voice, "Are you really Your Excellency Li Yundong? The reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king?" Li Yundong naturally didn't understand this sentence, but looking at Nishikyu Haruo's expression, he could guess a little. He snorted coldly, raised his eyebrows, and looked at the large group of Japanese people kneeling outside. He said coldly, "What, you don't believe me? Do you want to have a try?" As soon as Zi Yuan finished translating this sentence, Nishikyu Haruo boldly looked up at Li Yundong and was immediately shocked by his bearing and gaze. He was so scared that a layer of cold sweat broke out on his back. What a joke. The 3 giants of Buddhism had been beaten by this man and were now holding a funeral. How could he dare to compete with him? Besides, heroes come from the young. He had such a bearing at such a young age, and the women around him were unbelievably beautiful, especially the woman wearing a long white dress. She was so beautiful that she looked like a fairy that had walked out of a painting. He couldn't help but suspect something. Nishikyu Haruo quickly lowered his head. After thinking carefully, he mumbled a few more words in Japanese, and there were a lot of sounds in his voice. Zi Yuan, who was next to him, translated it for Li Yundong. Li Yundong knew that Nishikyu Haruo was announcing his identity and expressing his respect and worship for the reincarnation of the immovable wisdom king on behalf of the dozens of people in the Sasaki group. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry at these words. He thought to himself, the Japanese really don't know what's good for them. Lu Rinjiao, a famous general of the Tang dynasty, had wiped out the Japanese navy in one battle. Since then, the Japanese had been well behaved for nearly 1,000 years. Even if the Yuan dynasty had robbed the Han people of their beautiful country and destroyed the southern Song dynasty, the Japanese stubbornly believed that they were still vassal states of the Song dynasty and refused to recognize these barbarians of the Yuan dynasty as their boss. Now, he was worried that the Japanese would come to make trouble. Hey, now it seemed that it was a wise decision to insist on fighting to the end with injuries. Li Yundong's mind was racing, and he was thinking a little far away for a moment. However, Nishikya Haruo saw that Li Yundong was hesitating again, and his expression was uncertain. He immediately handed over a golden invitation with both hands and said respectfully in stiff Chinese, "This is a small gift. Please accept it, Wisdom King." Li Yundong winked at Feng Na, who had been stunned for a long time. Only then did Feng Na timidly take the golden invitation. As soon as she opened it, she immediately sucked in a breath of cold air, and her heart was pounding. Although Feng Na came from a good family and had seen some of the world, she had never seen a scene like this before. She hadn't even seen it in the movies. With so many people in black kneeling here, even a fool would know who they were kneeling to. Although this idea had popped up in Feng Na's mind more than once, this time, the impact and shock it gave Feng Na was especially strong this time. Feng Na looked at Li Yundong strangely and said in her heart, "Li Yundong, who on earth are you?" Feng Na's best friend, Ching Cheng, saw that she immediately closed the golden invitation after glancing at it. She didn't dare to look at it again, as if there was something scary inside. She curiously leaned over and opened it. Her eyes immediately widened, and she covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes almost popping out of their sockets. Seeing the two of them like this, Li Yundong felt a little funny in his heart. They hadn't seen much of the world. He didn't know what they had seen to make them so shocked. But when he opened it himself, he was also shocked and his eyes widened. He looked at Nishikya Haruo in front of him with his mouth agape and thought to himself, "Damn, this guy is so generous." Chapter 735. Li Yundong looked at the bank check in the gold card with a strange look in his eyes. There was an Arabic number, 1, on it, followed by a series of OS, which made people really jealous and dazzled. Asterisk 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 asterisk, as the saying goes, money moves people's hearts. Even a great cultivator like Li Yundong couldn't help but feel his heart beat faster when he suddenly saw such a long series of numbers. Dharma, wealth, companions, and earthly treasures. Money was not omnipotent, but without money, it was absolutely impossible. He had just boasted that he would open Sanxian all over the world, and now someone had come to give him money. Even if he wanted to doze off, there was no need to give him a pillow like this, right? This was too strange. Although this series of zeros was the unit of measurement of Japanese yen, such a long series of numbers was scary even in Japanese. This Sasaki group is too rich. Why did they rush over to give me money? They have too much money to spend, so they want me to help them spend it? Although Li Yundong's face was still calm for a moment, he felt strange in his heart. He didn't know whether he should accept the money or not. Seeing his expression, Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, smiled and said in a low voice, "What's wrong? You don't dare to accept it? This is actually very normal. As far as I know, many rich businessmen and officials have gone to the temple to burn incense. They burn 600,000 merit incense every month. In this way, you know how powerful it is." Li Yundong turned to look at her, smiled bitterly, and said in a low voice, "If it were you, would you dare to accept it?" Zi Yuan thought for a moment, shook her head gently, and said in a low voice, "This money is hot. I don't dare to accept it." Li Yundong also had a plan in an instant and secretly agreed with Zi Yuan in his heart. If this money had been given by Shen Wankai or Chris, Li Yundong might have been thick-skinned enough to accept it, but who had given it? Yamaguchi Gumi. It was at least one of the top 5 underworld forces in the world. If he dared to accept this kind of money, his guts must be boundlessly plump. Even if he had 100 mouths to explain that he had nothing to do with Yamaguchi-gumi in the future, the higher-ups would not believe him no matter what he said. He had always kept a low profile. If he were to accept this money, he would really be afraid that the higher-ups would not look for him for tea and chat. He was tired of living. He wasn't afraid, but the problem was that because of this small amount of money, he would be targeted by the higher-ups from now on. That was definitely not worth it. As the saying goes, don't be afraid of a thief stealing, but be afraid of a thief remembering. If there was always a pair of eyes staring at you from behind, how could you live? Of course, he could run away if he wanted to, but what about Su Chan? What about the Fox Zen School? What about Ziyuan? What about her Lingong sect? What about Feng Na and Ching Cheng? What about their families? Taking 10,000 steps back, even if he was bold enough to accept the money, what would the cultivators of the other sects think of him if word of this got out? Would someone use this as an excuse to poke him in the back and say that he was a traitor who colluded with outsiders? Although this matter was a little extreme, there had never been a lack of such patriotic people in China, especially when there was an economic dispute with Yamaguchi-gumi. It was really like mud falling in one's pants. Even if it was not shit, it was shit. Li Yundong didn't know that the Japanese underworld had always had a good tradition of donating to the forces of Buddhism. As long as it was not discovered, the disciples of Buddhism would always accept it with a smile. After thinking for a while, he pushed the golden invitation back and said very seriously, I don't accept a reward without doing anything. Even if I am the reincarnation of Wisdom King, I can't accept this gift from you for no reason. Seeing that Li Yundong had refused him, but he couldn't understand what he had said, Nishikyoharu was very anxious. He immediately turned his head and waved at a little brother behind him, who was black from head to toe. The little brother immediately got up from the ground and trotted over to him. After Nishikyoharu asked him a few questions, the little brother quickly translated what Li Yundong had said before. Nishikyoharu immediately said a few more words, and the little brother raised his head and said to Li Yundong, the wise king, our team leader said that this is the incense money they donated. It's all very clean money, which represents our sincerity and sincerity. Moreover, the people who came this time are all members with clean identities. There won't be any disputes. Please accept it, the wise king. Li Yundong shook his head like a rattle drum. No, this is a tea house, not a temple. How can I accept incense money? I'll accept your kindness, but I can't accept this money. Nishikyoharu saw that Li Yundong had refused so decisively, and he was very disappointed. For a moment, he couldn't help but lower his head with a depressed expression. However, the little brother next to him was a little clever. He whispered something to him, and Nishikyoharu was immediately overjoyed. He gave him a look of appreciation, but the little brother looked as if he had eaten a ginseng fruit, and all his bones became lighter. Nishikyoharu looked at Li Yundong eagerly and said, the wise king, if you don't accept our donation, then at least, let us drink a few cups of tea and burn a few sticks of incense, right? After listening to Zi Yuan's translation, Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. Although he didn't like the Japanese people's behavior of flattering and bullying, as the saying went, one should not hit a smiling person. Nishikyoharu in front of him should be considered a great figure in the local area. Now that he was carefully smiling at him, even if he was 100 times unwilling, he couldn't say it out loud. Li Yundong thought for a moment and thought to himself, it shouldn't be a big deal to come in and have a cup of tea, right? He has come from afar. Although he is a gangster, his heart is at least devout. I can't just close the door and go back and say that I'm not broad-minded, can I? Thinking of this, Li Yundong nodded gently, agreeing with Nishikyoharu's words. He turned his head and whispered a few words to the little foxes beside him, asking them to prepare the tea set and boil the water to make tea to receive the guests. When the little foxes saw their sect leader being worshipped like a god, they felt an indescribable sense of pride. They turned their heads to look at Han Zhen and Jim, who had long been dumbstruck, and then hurried off to do their work. Hanjen and Jim saw Nishikyoharu waving his hand and saying a few words. The underlings who were kneeling at the entrance and blocking the pedestrian street all stood up and rushed into the Desanxian tea house. The tea house was filled to the brim with people. Even Nishikyoharu himself did not have a seat to sit on. He could not help but glance at Hanjen and Jim. He tried to speak to them in very awkward English. "Can I sit here and drink tea with you guys?" He thought that these two people were Li Yundong's friends, so he was very polite and didn't dare to offend them. After he finished speaking, Jim didn't mind, but Hanjen's expression suddenly became very interesting. Jim's family was a righteous one, and he himself was a simple-minded playboy. He didn't have a deep understanding of the power of the Yamaguchi-gumi, but Hanjen's family was in the underworld. How could he not know the famous Yamaguchi-gumi? Although his family was also in the underworld, compared with the Yamaguchi-gumi, those people in his family were really a group of good men and women who ate vegetarian and prayed to Buddha. They couldn't wait to ask Washington and the United Nations for a Peace Friendship Award to match their status. Although he was only the leader of the Sasaki group in Osaka, he didn't dare to offend him easily. If an ordinary person wanted to sit down with him at the same table, he might have kicked him out. But now that Nishikyoharu wanted to sit down, how could he dare to stop him? Nishikyoharu saw that he forced a smile and politely asked him to sit down, so he felt relieved and looked at Li Yundong again. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't want his donation, Nishikyoharu was tempted to drink tea. "You don't want my money? Well, you're doing business anyway. I'll drink the most expensive tea. I'll order 10 cups in one go and pour 9 cups after 1 cup. You can't control me, can you? Now it's not considered a bribe, is it?" With this idea in mind, Nishikyoharu waved his hand and asked his subordinates to relax a little. This time, the subordinates suddenly cheered. Although most of them were rough people and didn't understand elegant things like tea art, this tea was extraordinary. This was tea made in the tea shop opened by the Akalanatha. Could an ordinary person drink it? Although it was not made by the Akalanatha himself, it was not ordinary tea. These subordinates all ordered the most expensive tea, and in an instant, they ordered all the good Huangshan Maojian tea in the store. Zi Yuan watched from the side as these uncouth men chewed peonies and commented on the quality of the tea. She didn't know whether to cry or laugh. At this time, Li Yundong also knew what the other party was up to. When he saw the little foxes running over to tell him that the good tea had been ordered by these guys and asking him what to do, he immediately had an idea and said in a low voice, "It's simple. Sell the rest of the tea to them at the highest price. If they want to give me money for free, I really don't dare to accept it, but if they want to take advantage of me and give me money for doing business, would I still refuse the money if I was out of my mind? Go, go, go. Anyway, these guys can't drink it." The little foxes were all overjoyed. One by one, they laughed so hard that their noses and eyes couldn't be seen. When Feng Na, Ching Cheng, and Chris, who had rushed over, saw this scene, they were all speechless and smiled bitterly. Previously, when the members of the Sasaki group had knelt outside the pedestrian street, the surrounding tourists had seen a lot of Western scenery. Some people were very curious and looked at Desanxian. They didn't understand the origin of this shop and why it was like this. It seemed like a show. When one of the men passed by, he heard the people around him talking about it. His heart skipped a beat and he wanted to join in the fun and go in to drink some tea. However, a man who was walking with him tried to persuade him, "Old Zhang, don't go. This is a scam. I went there once before, and I almost lost my pants. This shop is very black. Don't go there." The man who had spoken was none other than the man who had been tricked by Su Chan and the little fox in the Desanxian tea shop and almost knelt on the washboard. Today, he happened to pass by here with his friends, only to see that there were many people watching the fun. They had wanted to go forward and watch the fun, but they hadn't expected that their companion would want to walk into the trap. In desperation, he had to tell Lao Zhang what had happened. However, unexpectedly, his words aroused Lao Zhang's burning sense of justice. He said with a righteous face, "Are you kidding me? In this bright world, how could there be such a black shop in broad daylight? Is this still the world of the party? Are we still living under the red flag? I don't believe that they dare to trick me in front of so many people." As he spoke, he ignored the man's dissuasion, pushed through the crowd, and swaggered toward Desanxian. Lao Zhang stepped into the Desanxian. Without even looking at it, he shouted, "I want to." Before he could finish his words, he suddenly saw that the Desanxian teahouse was full of people. These people were all wearing black sunglasses, black suits, black trousers, and black leather shoes. They were dressed as if they were afraid that others would not know that they were gangsters. Moreover, most of them were rough people. Some of them drank tea for a while and couldn't help but become unrestrained. As soon as they took off their clothes, they revealed dense and terrifying tattoos. It was really scary. It was also because Li Yundong was here that these gangsters did not dare to make a loud noise. They just whispered. For a moment, there was only a buzzing sound in the tea house. But when Lao Zhang roared, the buzzing sound suddenly stopped. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the man standing at the door. So many gangsters stopped talking at the same time. Their power was really scary. Lao Zhang's voice at the door was immediately stuck in his throat, as if he was a duck being grabbed by the neck. His back was covered with a layer of cold sweat. Without saying a word, he turned around and ran away. He rushed out of the Desanxian teahouse and rushed to his friend. With a pale face, he said, "You're right. This teahouse is 2F** King evil. It's not an ordinary kind of evil. Let's go. We can't afford to offend them, but we can hide." After that, the two of them left as if they were fleeing. Li Yundong watched the man named Lao Zhang suddenly appear and then suddenly run away in fear. His heart suddenly moved, and he couldn't help but complain. He wanted to cry but had no tears. It's over. Who dares to come here to drink tea in the future? In the eyes of others, my Desanxian teahouse is probably a gangster teahouse, right? Except for gangsters, no one will dare to come in the future, will they? Alas, one mistake can cause everlasting regret. I really shouldn't have been soft-hearted and let these Japanese people in to drink tea. Now, I was greedy for a small advantage, but I lost a lot in the end. Li Yundong was in pain, but Nishikuharu, who was beside him, suddenly said something to Li Yundong. As soon as he finished speaking, Zi Yuan's expression suddenly became very interesting. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Zi Yuan, what did he say?" Zi Yuan smiled faintly and looked at Li Yundong with a strange look in her eyes. He said, "Are you interested in opening this tea house in Wakayama County?" Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Well, I was just wondering if Desanxian would become a professional gathering place for gangsters." "You just said something like that. Do you really want to turn my tea house into a gangster chain tea house?" Chapter 736. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry at Nishikuharuo's words, but Han Zhen was even more shocked. For God's sake, he had just made a bet with this guy, saying that if his tea house could be opened all over the world, he would be the president of the United States. As a result, someone from the Yamaguchi-gumi immediately ran over and cried, asking this guy to open the tea house in Japan. Although it was only Wakayama Prefecture, in Han Zhen's opinion, if the Yamaguchi-gumi really helped him, it would be a matter of minutes to open the tea house all over Japan or even all of Southeast Asia. When the tea house opened to a certain number and accumulated a certain amount of funds and fame, it would definitely not be a joke to go global. Thinking of this, Han Zhen's eyes kept turning, and his eyes were full of depression and doubt. The current situation was too coincidental. It was like a trap waiting for him. As soon as he jumped into it, the other party tightened the trap. "You can't trick me like this." In Han Zhen's opinion, if he were to encounter such a thing, he would probably laugh so hard that he would wake up in his dreams. There was no need to hesitate, so he quickly agreed. However, Han Zhen was a gangster himself, so he regarded everyone else as gangsters. It was like some people were like maggots, but they regarded the whole world as a big manure tank. In Li Yundong's opinion, although Nishikyoharu's proposal was a little tempting, and it was very timely, the identity of this guy was really inappropriate. If Li Yundong had any financial dealings with this group of guys, it would really be a stain that he would never be able to clear up in the future. Li Yundong thought for a moment and flatly refused Nishikyoharu's proposal. Han Zhen, who was watching from the side, was shocked and anxious. He wanted to grab Li Yundong and scold him for being a fool. He would rather offend the Yamaguchi-gumi than seize such a good opportunity. However, Nishikyohara Haruo only revealed a disappointed expression and did not feel offended. Of course, if it had been an ordinary person in front of him, Nishikyoharuo would have immediately turned hostile and roared with a ferocious face, "Fuck, I gave you face, but you don't want it. Someone, drag him out and kill him." However, the person in front of him didn't dare to do so. He didn't even dare to think about it. In his opinion, it was normal for the reincarnated immovable wisdom king to reject him so coldly. However, he didn't dare to do anything except drink some tea during this trip, which made this senior Buddhist believer feel a little embarrassed. He was unwilling to go back like this, so he tentatively asked Li Yundong, "Please ask the wise king if I can burn incense here." After listening to Zi Yuan's translation, Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to refuse, he wanted to laugh. He wanted to refuse, but Zi Yuan winked at him, as if she wanted him to help. Li Yundong had a deep trust in Zi Yuan. His heart skipped a beat, and he changed his words. "Okay, but I don't have any incense burners, merit incense, or god statues here. Even if you want to offer incense, you don't have any conditions." Unexpectedly, after Nishikyoharu heard the translation from his underling, he grinned and clapped his hands. Like magic, his underlings behind him conjured a wooden statue of the immovable wisdom king and an antique incense burner. Then, these experienced mafias took out 3 joss sticks from their backs in unison. Although Li Yundong was also a great cultivator with great magical powers, he couldn't help but be a little stunned when he saw this scene. He thought to himself, "Oh my god, it seems that they are all ready. Amazing, truly amazing." He just didn't know whether these guys brought these from Japan or bought them locally. If it was brought over from Japan, wouldn't that be too exaggerated? However, even if it was bought locally, wasn't it a little too thorough? Was there a need to be so pious? "Brother, are you part of the underworld or not? Why do you look more pious than those guys from Jinyan Tantrism?" But these words were hidden in Li Yundong's heart, and he didn't ask them out loud. Although he also cultivated Buddhist mental cultivation methods, he didn't understand the fatality connection and the mind connection, so he could only hide these questions in the depths of his heart. At this time, everyone in the Desanxian tea house was stunned to see the group of black-clothed men respectfully place the statue of the immovable wisdom king on the tea table in the middle of the tea house hall, and then put an incense burner in front of the wooden statue. Nishikyoharu took the lead in offering incense, and then the underlings behind him lined up in a long snake formation, quietly waiting to offer incense and pay their respects. Japanese people were rigid and law-abiding. Whether it was in society, in the company or at home, all kinds of rules were very strict. Among them, the rules of the underworld were even more astonishing and particularly cruel. These black-clothed men said that they would line up in 1 line, but they would never line up in 2. Moreover, none of them whispered to each other. Everyone lined up honestly according to their seniority. The line went all the way to the pedestrian street, blocking the intersection again. But when a passerby said that they were going to pass by, they didn't do anything to bully others. Instead, they honestly made way for them. When they passed by, they returned to the formation. Among them, there were those who had finished offering incense. They went to the side and stood with their hands crossed in front of them. Their eyes were focused on their noses were focused on their hearts, and their eyes were focused on their hearts. Li Yundong watched them take turns to offer incense with candles in their hands, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He turned his head and saw that Zi Yuan was secretly laughing. He couldn't help glaring at her and whispering, "Hey, are you making fun of me?" Zi Yuan smiled and was about to speak when she saw Ching Ching tugging at his sleeve and saying, "Hey, Li Yundong, are they worshipping you?" Ching Ching was from an ordinary family. Looking at the scene in front of her, she felt like she was in a dream. She looked at the murderous black-clothed men taking turns to offer incense. She didn't dare to speak loudly and kept her voice low, as if she was afraid of alarming these gangsters. Li Yundong said with a wry smile, "It seems that they are worshipping me." At this time, Feng Na also came to her senses a little. She was dumbfounded. She couldn't help looking at Li Yundong, as if she had seen an Namekian. She covered her mouth and whispered, "No way, you're not dead yet." This sentence immediately made Zi Yuan burst out laughing. The usually dignified and elegant fairy also found herself so indecent. For a moment, she turned her head away, her shoulders shaking. The little foxes couldn't help but turn their heads and run to the warehouse at the back. As soon as they rushed in, they all burst out laughing. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm not dead yet, but I think I'm about to die from their worship." Feng Na didn't think it was funny. She said, "They seem to be worshipping the immovable Wisdom King? What does that have to do with you?" "You, who the hell are you?" Li Yundong's face turned serious. "Actually, I am the legendary Martian." "Earthlings, you should wake up." Feng Na was stunned, and the corner of her mouth twitched. It seemed that she wanted to laugh, but in the end, she didn't. Instead, she sighed sadly in her heart. In the end, he refused to tell me these things. However, Ching Ching, who was standing to one side, laughed heartlessly and said, "Hey, Martian, be careful. Be careful that Ultraman comes to make trouble for you." As she said this, she pointed to the Japanese who were burning incense. Li Yundong also glanced at them, only to see that although the Japanese had heard their whispers and laughter, none of them had turned their heads to look at them. They looked solemn and respectful, which really made people feel a little respectful. Li Yundong waved his hand at Feng Na and Ching Cheng and said, "Forget it, don't make trouble. They are worshipping me, and I, the master, am laughing on the side. It's not like a human being. It's really inappropriate, isn't it?" His words were serious, but when they thought about it, it was really strange and funny. Feng Na and Ching Ching both covered their mouths and laughed. At this time, more and more people gathered outside the Desanxian. Many people looked inside curiously, as if they didn't understand why this group of black-clothed people were burning incense and worshipping the gods here so devoutly and solemnly. For a moment, they were all guessing and talking about it. Li Yundong saw that these Japanese people were burning incense in turn as if there was no one else around. He suddenly said to Zi Yuan in a low voice with some embarrassment, "Hey, in the future, will my Desanxian become the hall of these guys? Isn't this too exaggerated?" Zi Yuan pursed her lips and smiled, but didn't answer his question. Instead, she turned to Feng Na and Ching Cheng and whispered, "How much was the turnover just now?" Ching Ching immediately ran to the counter and took a look. Her eyes suddenly widened. She trotted over and said in a slightly trembling voice, 1,380,000. Ah! Feng Na suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. She knew that this group of Yamaguchi-kun must have earned a lot from this tea, but she didn't expect that they would give away so much money. Li Yundong was also speechless for a moment. When he had opened this tea shop, he had aimed at high-level people, but he hadn't expected that it would be such a high-end method. This was really a case of not opening for 3 months, but opening for 3 years. Of course, this was also due to Li Yundong's ruthlessness just now. Whether it was bad tea or bad tea, he had sold it to these guys at a sky-high price. Otherwise, these people wouldn't have been able to drink so much money even if they broke their stomachs. After all, Feng Na and Ching Cheng had not seen much of the world. Suddenly seeing so much money, their mouths were dry, their eyes were hot, their hearts were beating fast, and their voices were trembling. They were even more flustered. Ever since Feng Na had resigned from the position of president of the student union of the school, she had wanted to help Li Yundong take care of the tea shop, so she had put almost all her effort into it. Although she was surprised, she soon thought of something and whispered to Li Yundong, this money. Can you accept it? As she spoke, she looked at these gangsters worriedly, as if saying, these guys are not good people at first glance. Will they go back on their word? At this time, Li Yundong laughed and said, don't worry, they won't go back on their word. Feng Na was relieved. She looked at the Japanese people who were taking turns to offer incense and said in a low voice, Li Yundong, why didn't you agree to open a tea house with them just now? Do you think their background is not good? Li Yundong glanced at the Japanese people in the hall and said with a wry smile, do you want to sanction to become the Zhonghua branch of Yamaguchi-gumi or the Tanko branch of Tiannan City in the future? Feng Na couldn't help laughing. She said in a low voice, it doesn't matter if they don't cooperate, but I have a good way to make a lot of money. Chapter 737. When Li Yundong heard Feng Na's words, he immediately laughed. Although his cultivation was high now, he was not very interested in fame and fortune. However, at the moment, a large group of people were living with him. He had to let them live a good life with him. Otherwise, they would have to live a hard life in the future. No matter how good he was at fighting, it would be useless. Soon. It wouldn't have mattered if he was alone, but every woman around him was a great beauty. Even Ching Cheng was a pretty big girl, not to mention the others. With such a group of enchanting beauties following him, not to mention jewelry, clothing, food, housing, and transportation, he had to keep up with them. Otherwise, when beauties like Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin went out, what they were wearing were street stalls. What would that be like? Even if they were willing to wear them, he couldn't bear to look at them. Therefore, even if Li Yundong had enemies all over the world, he had no hatred for the word money. Li Yundong asked with a smile, what, do you have a good idea? Feng Na chuckled, quietly pointed at Nishikihara, and said in a low voice, it's very simple. The wool comes from the sheep. Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. He understood a little, but he couldn't believe it. He stared at her in disbelief and said, you mean? Feng Na smiled and said, I know you are a gentleman and are embarrassed to say such things, so don't listen to my idea. I'll tell Zi Yuan. As she said this, she turned her head and whispered a few words to Zi Yuan. However, with Li Yundong's cultivation, how could he not hear what she said? When he heard it, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Feng Na whispered to Zi Yuan to tell the Japanese to leave the wooden statue and the incense burner here and not take them away. Although these words seemed to have no head or tail, the meaning behind them was very memorable. The other party had brought an incense burner and a wooden statue, but they wouldn't let anyone take them away. What did they mean? It was very simple. They could keep it for future use. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that Feng Na was ready to do business with him again. Feng Na's idea was simple. It was nothing more than using Li Yundong as a shield. Logically speaking, this idea of hers was a little whimsical, so she didn't go into detail about it. It was clear that this fresh graduate was quite a scheming person, especially at a time like this. His quick-wittedness and quick reflexes were commendable. Given time, he might even become a capable person in the business world. Feng Na's idea was very simple, and it was obvious that Li Yundong's idea was rather whimsical. Soon after Feng Na finished speaking to Zi Yuan, she looked at her with sparkling eyes. In the depths of Feng Na's heart, she had long been envious and in awe of Zi Yuan. When she first saw her, she was completely overwhelmed by this woman. No matter how she compared herself, she couldn't find any way to surpass her. This really made Feng Na discouraged. In Feng Na's opinion, compared to Zhou Qin and Su Chan, she also had her own strengths. However, in front of Zi Yuan, she felt that the other party was unfathomable and unfathomable. She didn't dare to show the slightest bit of disrespect. Therefore, Feng Na secretly looked at Zi Yuan anxiously, for fear that she would frown and say something bad. After hearing this, Zi Yuan looked at Feng Na in surprise, and then smiled at Li Yundong. You found a good manager. Feng Na was overjoyed, and her heart that had jumped to her throat immediately calmed down. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, You too. Forget it, I don't care. You guys do what you want. Ching Ching, who was standing to one side, spoke up for her best friend. Hey, Li Yundong, that's not very kind of you. We help you take care of this shop. We do all the purchasing and accounting. We're so tired that we don't even have time to sleep at night. It's fine if you just leave everything to us, but how can you say such sarcastic words? You can't be like this. Feng Na was very anxious when she heard this. She quickly pulled Ching Ching aside and whispered, Hey, stop talking. However, Li Yundong's expression changed. He pretended to bow with his hands in front of his chest and said, You two great talents, I'm sorry for being impolite. His behavior immediately made Feng Na and Ching Ching laugh. Ching Ching smiled and said, Well, I thought that now that you have become a big shot, you don't care about us small people anymore. Feng Na glanced at Ching Ching and said in a low voice, You really measure the heart of a gentleman with your own mean measure. Li Yundong is not such a person. As she spoke, she glanced at Li Yundong. Suddenly, she felt that the hothead who had shattered a boulder on his chest back at school was gone. The one standing before her was a mature, yet ridiculously young man. He was looking at her with a smile. Although she still couldn't figure out who he was, the background and power that he had displayed made her tremble in awe. But the more she thought about it, the more precious Li Yundong's unpretentious and easygoing attitude became. This was especially so when she saw this mesmerizing boy in front of her. When he smiled, it was as if there was a layer of light around him that made people unable to look at him directly. If they looked at him for too long, their hearts would beat wildly. For a moment, Feng Na's heart skipped a beat. She could no longer associate this man with the boy she had met at school. Feng Na was dazed for a moment. Ching Ching coughed dryly, which brought Feng Na back to her senses. Her cheeks turned crimson, and she hurriedly lowered her head to hide her embarrassment and shyness by tucking her ears behind her ear. Li Yundong noticed that this senior of his, who used to have a sense of chivalry and shrewdness, was now acting like a pretty girl from a humble family. Her shyness when she lowered her head added a touch of charm to the round-faced beauty. Ching Ching, who was standing to one side, saw all of this. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Feng Na playfully. She opened her mouth and wanted to say something that would make Feng Na want to tear her mouth apart. Fortunately, before she could say anything, Li Yundong laughed and said, Feng Na, Ching Ching, you two can do whatever you want. Since this shop is handed over to you, you can do whatever you want. I trust you. At the end of the year, I will reward you according to your contributions. As Li Yundong spoke, he casually patted Feng Na's shoulder. Although this action was nothing special in the eyes of others, Feng Na's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She felt as if her shoulder had become a little numb and soft. Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, sighed in her heart when she saw Feng Na's lustful look. She shook her head and said, It's really a pity that Yundong is always like this. What will happen to this guy in the future? How many girls will he hurt? However, Zi Yuan also knew that she was also in a mess, so she didn't have the leisure to care about others. She quickly restrained her thoughts and said to Li Yundong, they've finished burning incense and are waiting for you. Li Yundong turned his head and took a look. Sure enough, he saw Nishikuharu and the others standing respectfully in the hall, as orderly as soldiers waiting for their officers to inspect them. Li Yundong nodded to Zi Yuan and motioned for her to follow him. Zi Yuan smiled slightly, indicating that she understood, and followed him. Nishikuharu had seen Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, Feng Na, and the others laughing and talking about something. He also knew his identity, so he didn't go up to join in the fun. He waited obediently for Li Yundong. If Li Yundong said that he would wait for a few hours, he would probably wait here for a few hours. Although the leader of the Sasaki group was not a devil who could stop children from crying in Wakayama County, he was definitely a cruel and merciless person who killed people without blinking an eye. Except for his own boss, he was only so respectful in front of Li Yundong. If it were his enemies, they would probably not believe that the famous Nishikuharu in Wakayama County would be as docile as a kitten. When Nishikuharu saw Li Yundong coming up, he quickly took 2 steps forward and said a few words. Ziyuan told Li Yundong that the Japanese wanted to pay the bill, but they expected that it would cost a lot of money. They didn't have so much cash on them, and the checks in their hands couldn't be broken to pay the bill, so they wanted to ask someone to go with them to the bank. Li Yundong nodded and glanced at Feng Na and Ching Ching, asking them with his eyes which one of them was going to go. Ching Ching raised her hand without thinking and said, I'll go, I'll go. Immediately, a little fox jumped up and raised her hand, joining in the fun. Feng Na was amused and annoyed at the same time. She tugged at her and said in a low voice, Hey, these are all gangsters. Do you dare to go? Ching Ching smiled and said, I didn't dare before, but now don't you see who is standing behind me? He is a big shot who makes these gangsters kneel down and kowtow to him. Hee, don't worry, I'm not afraid. With that, she casually stepped forward and curiously looked at the scar on Nishikuharu's face and the tattoo on his neck with a pair of black eyes. Nishikuharu looked at her and grinned, trying to get close to her. However, as he smiled, his face became more and more ferocious, which scared Ching Ching so much that she couldn't help but take a step back. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the little foxes who had volunteered to join in the fun and asked one of them to go with Ching Ching. Although they were not powerful in the cultivation world, they were more than enough to deal with these Yamaguchi-kun. The little fox that had been chosen was overjoyed. She immediately put on an arrogant look and followed Nishikura Haruo and the others out in a line. The black-clothed members of Yamaguchi-gumi finally left, and the shop of Desanxian suddenly became brighter, but the upstairs and downstairs were a mess. Li Yundong gestured to the other little foxes in a low voice, motioning for them to clean up. At this time, Chris, who had been silent all this time, came up and whispered, Master, are you really going to open the shop in Japan? Li Yundong looked at her strangely and said, Didn't I already refuse these Japanese? Chris hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, I mean, if you invest in Japan, maybe I can help. If you want to open a tea shop in the United States, I have a way. Li Yundong looked at Chris in surprise. Before he could speak, his eyes involuntarily swept over Han Zhen and Jim, who were not far away. Han Zhen had naturally heard what Chris had said, especially what had happened just now, which made him feel as if he had been slapped in the face twice. Although Li Yundong hadn't said a word of humiliation to him, he felt his face burning. He wanted to find a hole to hide in immediately. Jim, on the other hand, didn't have such thoughts. His idea was very simple. He was a hedonistic son of rich parents, so he naturally looked down on those commoners. However, if the other party also displayed powerful strength and background, then he naturally wouldn't be so stupid as to bare his teeth at the other party. No matter how retarded hedonistic sons of rich parents were, their family background and starting point were still much higher than that of ordinary people. As long as they used their brains a little, they would be able to think and see much more than ordinary people. At this time, in Jim's opinion, this dark-headed and yellow-skinned countryman didn't look as eye-catching as before, but he still felt a little uncomfortable. In particular, Chris's tough attitude made him feel even more embarrassed. Han Zhen kicked Jim gently, motioning for him to speak. Jim said to Chris, Chris, are you really not going back? Chris hesitated for a moment, glanced at Li Yundong, and then shook her head decisively. No, I'm already an adult. Jim, you go back. Say hello to Mom and Dad and Grandma for me. Jim muttered a few words. He wanted to bulge his eyes and yell at Li Yundong, King, look after my sister. If anything happens to her, I'll break your bones. Or, my eyes are on you. Don't act recklessly. But the previous scene had really frightened him, a playboy. He couldn't say such words that had been easy to say in the past. He hesitated, but Han Zhen, who was beside him, simply pulled him away with a dark expression. The two of them walked far away before they slowed down their pace. Jim looked dejected and muttered, "T, we came here for nothing." Han Zhen glanced at him contemptuously, but when he looked up at him, he smiled again. He pushed the gold-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose, smiled slightly, and said, "It doesn't matter. Let's go back first. After we go back, I have a way to get Chris back." Jim turned his head to look at him. "Do you really have a way?" Han Zhen turned his head to look in the direction of Desanxian, and a trace of haze flashed across the corner of his eyes. He smiled coldly and said, "Let's wait and see." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.